Gotta get this chair put in a lot more.
Higher or lower?
Or not, no, higher.
You're gonna sit up. Oh, that's.
You ready? Good morning. I call this hearing to order. Today is the third hearing in a row for this subcommittee on various perspectives for a new Water Resources Development Act, WRDA. Importantly, today we will hear directly from members of Congress on their priorities and water resources issues affecting their districts directly. I look forward to hearing this testimony from all our members and working with my colleagues on the subcommittee to address the issues today in our new WRDA 2022. Let me start by asking unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare recess during today's hearing, and without objection, so ordered. The testimony we received today will help to inform us on what matters most to our colleagues and the nation as we move forward with drafting legislation. This local perspective is key to helping our communities achieve their desired outcomes and ensuring the Corps' expertise is accessible to all those who seek it. We are currently developing our 5th consecutive bipartisan WRDA bill. Thank you very much. This is clear evidence that WRDA has become a product of its own success. Our constituents demand and now expect that we move forward in developing this legislation every Congress. This consistency and predictability is also essential to the Corps itself and stakeholders across the country. I look forward to working with all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle and exacting a 5th consecutive WRDA for 2022. Thank you to all members who have made the time to come before the committee today, and I look forward to your testimony and working with you to write another successful WRDA bill and continue the important work of the Corps for the Water Resources Project nationwide. And this time I'd like to yield, and pleased to yield to my partner in this endeavor, Ranking Member Mr. Rouser, for any comments and thoughts.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to congratulate you on your Gold DeFlory Medal that you received from the Army Corps of Engineers for your significant contribution to the Army Corps. I thought that was a really nice ceremony that we had the other day, and I was really proud to be a part of that with you. Well deserved. Appreciate the opportunity to hear from our witnesses today. Today's hearing marks the 3rd hearing of the House of Representatives portion of the drafting of WRDA for 2022. And as I mentioned in our last 2 WRDA hearings, this is one of the most important pieces of legislation that we do here on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And it's one of the best examples of Congress working the way it should. Since 2014, Congress has passed a WRDA bill every 2 years. We plan to keep that trend moving. And in addition to being on a dependable schedule, these talks have been bipartisan, and it has made a big difference for all stakeholders, and in particular, improving our water infrastructure. In fact, the 2020 WRDA passed by voice vote in the House, and hopefully we'll have another such voice vote. I look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle here on the committee and the full House to pass another bipartisan WRDA. And in our previous WRDA hearing, we heard testimony from witnesses representing a cross-section of those partnering with the Army Corps of Engineers on a variety of programs, ranging from storm surge protection to navigation at our ports to environmental infrastructure. Today, we'll hear directly from our colleagues here in Congress on the priorities that are important to them and their districts. I look forward to hearing about these member priorities and how they will be a benefit to their communities and our country. Thank you to our colleagues who are providing testimony before us today. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rouser, and from your lips to God's ears on the fifth order. At this time, I'm pleased to yield to the chair of the full committee, Mr. DeFazio, for any thoughts he may have.
Madam Chair, thank you, and also, again, congratulations on recognition of your tremendous work. Grace is focused and been focused on water, obviously being from California sharpens your focus. It's since the day I met her. So she has been a tremendous advocate for water bills, for the Corps, and these necessary projects. As was stated earlier, this was a tradition reinstated after years of lapse by former Chairman Bill Schuster, and we have continued it and fully intend to continue it again this year. And as the ranking member pointed out, we passed the bill unanimously in the House, not once, not twice, but 3 times with some modifications because the Senate can't legislate. So we passed the bill. I negotiated with then Chair Wicker. We came to an agreement on some changes. We passed it again. And then I don't remember why we had to pass it the 3rd time. And finally, we only got it passed by melding it into the giant year-end omnibus, which required a new set of negotiations with Senator Shelby, who wanted further changes, somewhat diluting what we'd wanted to do, which was spend down the accumulated balance of taxes collected from the American people of $10 billion, while our harbors was dedicated to harbor maintenance starting under the Reagan administration. And I had twice passed bills out of this committee when the Republicans controlled the House, but Paul Ryan hated the idea personally and had it taken out in the rule each time, even though it had come out of committee unanimously. And then when we took over, we finally were able to move legislation, but the first bill we couldn't get done, and the second bill we did. So we finally freed up the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, $10 billion. Instead of spending it out in 5 years, which I have proposed, it'll be 10. But this is money that will be well spent. I mean, the Corps of Engineers, if you look at all of their obligations and duties across the United States of America, has a critical asset backlog of about $40 billion. So even with the major amounts of money in the IIJA and freeing up the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, the Corps is still going to have to choose and set priorities among its projects. And that's why we're here today, to hear from members for critical needs in their district so we can help the Corps, which is now better funded but not totally adequately funded, to best divine where to put these limited resources to help communities all across the nation deal with changes, with deteriorating dams or levees or, jetties, breakwaters, harbors, or, new threats that come with sea level rise, severe weather events, climate change. It's good to hear from our colleagues. We restored earmarks in the appropriations process, community development, community-oriented projects. We restored them through a very lengthy process in our INVEST Act. Unfortunately, got blown off by the Senate. Members of Congress often know the needs of their district better than some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., or a bureaucrat in the state capitol controlling the money. So I fully support this process. I'm looking forward to hearing from our colleagues and helping to set priorities in the next Word of Bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio, but you should also be aware that you received the 20th Bert Hoff Award from the Coast Guard this year. So congratulations for the work you've done for the Coast Guard, sir. Very much deserved.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that was a great honor to receive that award. Yes.
Well, congratulations, sir. I don't know if Mr. Graves is available. No? We will proceed. Thank you very much. we will proceed to ask our members that are remote to please turn their cameras on, keep them on until the testimony is complete. Thank you for being here and welcome. Given the number of members appearing before the committee today, and out of consideration for our colleagues' time, I ask unanimous consent that members of a committee be given 2 minutes each for question. This is a subcommittee to question our member witnesses following their statements, and without objection, so ordered. Members appearing before the committee today will have 5 minutes to give their oral testimony. Without objection, a witness's full statements will be included in the record. I'd like to recognize the first witness. And Ms. Fletcher, I recognize you, gentlewoman from Texas, for 5 minutes. You're recognized, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairwoman Napolitano. Thank you, Ranking Member Rouser. As a former member of this committee, I am proud and excited of the work we did together in the Water Resources Development Act of 2020, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify before the committee today about our community's priorities for water infrastructure investment in Houston and Harris County, Texas, for the benefit of our entire region in the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. I've submitted to the committee several priorities, including project-specific authorizations and policy changes that will build on the important work of this committee and on the historic Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There are 2 main drivers for our priorities, and I know they are the priorities of this committee and of this Congress. First, to support economic growth through infrastructure investment, facilitating that investment and partnerships in that effort. And second, to make our communities safer and more resilient through infrastructure investment. In the first category, I've asked for important policy modifications to the Houston Ship Channel Improvement Project benefit-cost ratios and an O&M cost sharing for ports and waterways that operate in depths greater than 50 feet, and mechanisms through which private industry can provide user fees to support projects like the Houston Ship Channel Improvement Project. I would be glad to discuss any of these common sense policy changes with the committee at any time. In the second category, I, along with, I'm certain, my colleagues from across our region, have asked the committee to authorize the projects outlined in the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Coastal Texas Study Chiefs Report. I previously shared some of the background on this project with this committee. Texans have spent more than a decade imagining, designing, and working to address the historic events that we have experienced in our recent past, from Hurricane Ike to Hurricane Harvey, with an eye toward the future, with an understanding of the challenges that face us, and what that means to us is building infrastructure that is resilient to floods, storms, and other threats, and that's not fragile in the face of these increasing risks. The result of that work is the Texas Coastal Study, and the time to authorize it is now. The project was developed as a result of a comprehensive study led by the Corps in partnership with the Texas General Land Office to identify feasible projects that would reduce risks to public health and the economy, restore critical ecosystems, and advance coastal resiliency. The Coastal Texas Study is a critical project that would stop storm surge at the coast, protecting our region and our nation from catastrophic damage. It protects the Texas coast, including the Houston region, home to more than 7 million people, and home to the Houston Ship Channel and the Port of Houston, the busiest port in the country by total tonnage, and the home to one of the largest, if not the largest, concentration of refining and petrochemical complexes in the world. The economic damage to the United States in the event of a catastrophic storm surge up the Houston Ship Channel would have dire consequences, not just for our region, but for our country. Essential products like gasoline, jet fuel, plastics, fertilizers, and cleaning chemicals are all made at the Port of Houston. The Texas Gulf Coast is responsible for 32% of the refining capacity for our entire country, including an estimated 40% of our country's jet fuel that we rely on for our national security. The consequences of the loss of that capacity cannot be overstated, and as it relates to our national security. And with recent events around the world, as well as our need for energy independence and growth, as well as the protection of our supply chains, it is more important than ever that we invest in this protection. Authorizing the Coastal Texas Study and the Port of Houston policy requests is in our national security interest and in our national economic interest. It is smart, it is timely, and it is what we need now for Texas and for the entire country. Thank you for your consideration of these important requests. I look forward to working with the committee on these projects and much more, and I yield back.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Fletcher. And now we turn to recognize our next member, gentleman from Virginia, remotely, Mr. Whitman, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser, and I want to thank you for allowing me to testify before you today. And I'm honored to highlight some of the needs facing Virginia as you consider the upcoming Water Resources Development Package. The Water Resources Development Act is necessary legislation that provides for improvements to the nation's ports, inland waterways, flood protection, ecosystem restoration, and other water resources infrastructure and policy. Water infrastructure is vital to moving goods throughout the country, from products we all use every day in our lives and to crops and goods we produce domestically and send abroad. And I hope this committee in the House upholds its duty to authorize nationally important water infrastructure improvements that are more locally driven. Furthermore, I'd like to thank the Corps of Engineers as they work hard to manage more than 1,500 water resource development projects, many of them in Virginia. The Army Corps of Engineers is critical to our Commonwealth, from the Norfolk Harbor Channel widening and deepening project to the public waterways restoration projects across Virginia. As a proud representative of the Commonwealth of Virginia, home of the Port of Virginia, one of the largest and busiest ports on the eastern seaboard, advancing the work being done by the Port of Virginia to improve and expand its operations is critical. The port manages cargo that is shipped to all 48 contiguous states. The Port of Virginia is a national gateway for commerce, supporting business across the country. Moreover, in Virginia's 1st District, 334 businesses utilize the services of the Port of Virginia. As a catalyst for commerce, the port is attracting growth, fostering development, and creating jobs. On the state level, cargo moving through the port supports more than 530,000 jobs statewide and generates in excess of $90 billion in annual economic impact in Virginia. I would also like to take this time to highlight some word of priorities the subcommittee should look at in deliberating this bill. Anchorage F is currently designed as a 3,000-foot circle for free swinging bow anchoring. This is in the Norfolk Harbor and channels. The anchorage in its current design is used primarily as an emergency anchorage in inclement wave weather in the harbor or in situations of unexpected delays. For vessels to effectively utilize the anchorage, it is imperative and common sense for the anchorage and approach depths to match that of the federal channel. A deeper and wider anchorage will allow further use of the anchorage beyond the primary function and permit use by larger vessels calling on our port. Additionally, an improved anchorage and anchorage approach could provide passing vessels safe harbor during storm conditions. The proposed modification includes widening the anchorage F beyond its currently authorized diameter of 3,620 feet to a diameter of 3,840 feet and deepening the anchorage to 55 feet, consistent with the 1986 authorization in the project depth of the federal channel project. These costs have been developed to a planning stage level of confidence and remain within the project's Section 902 cost limit. Also, request for coastal resiliency funding for the Hampton Roads area. I request that the legislative language to allow the United States Corps of Engineers to include federal property in their feasibility studies for the Norfolk Hampton Roads area. By allowing the Corps to include federal properties for an upcoming coastal storm risk management study of the peninsula and greater Hampton Roads, it would solve the restriction problem in incorporating those installations and facilities into the civil works planning and construction process. The intent of this language is narrowly focused on the CSRM study on the peninsula. It is intended only to assure that the United States Corps of Engineers studies are comprehensive and holistic. The language is not intended to indicate that the Corps of Engineers has a responsibility for carrying out civil projects on federal installations. I believe this common sense language will ultimately produce a better report for action and range of actors in the region and will make sure that we coordinate across a variety of different uses, including federal facilities and military facilities. I want to thank the chairwoman, the ranking member, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify before you today. And I look forward to working with the committee and the Corps as we move forward towards finishing WRDA 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Whitman. Are there any questions of the member? Hearing none. Thank you, sir. I would like to recognize the next witness, Gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to you and Ranking Member Rouser and Chairman DeFazio, good morning, and thank you for allowing me to come by this morning to speak with the Water Resources Subcommittee of your full committee. Houston sits at the epicenter of global trade. Our nation's supply and insourced by cities like Houston, home to the busiest deep draft waterway in the nation, Port Houston. The port has as many ship calls annually as the next 3 largest U.S. ports combined, and it provides $801.9 billion in national economic value. But it is imperative that the port, like its counterparts in the world's busiest trade routes, keep up with increased shipping activity, larger barges, and the need for deeper waterways. I come before you to request that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers take up our delegation's request for taking on the assumption of maintenance on Project 11, the port's large-scale project to widen, deepen, and dredge the port so that it remains a viable center of commercial trade for our nation. We must also ensure that Port Houston is fully supported in project financing through operations and maintenance. This can be done through your support of policy requests that I and several members of my Houston colleagues have submitted, which modifies the O&M cost sharing for ports deeper than 50 feet. These projects' priorities, which were made possible for consideration by this act, garner enormous benefits not only for Texas, but for the entire nation. The port is a keystone of American critical infrastructure, whose value is especially critical in times of great national security threat and threats posed to our nation's energy supply as it does today. Then we also ask for support for our Ike Dike. Additionally, it is imperative that we discuss the need for full-fledged support for the Gulf Coast seawall barrier, commonly known as the Ike Dike. Prior to this meeting, I have led an effort with my colleagues in the Houston delegation to request support for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Coastal Texas Studies Chiefs Report to authorize the construction of a coastal seawall that would protect millions of families across the greater Houston and Galveston area. We must ensure that our area has the resources it needs to protect the greater Houston and Galveston region's manufacturing, retail, agriculture, business, energy, and military supply chains in Texas and in the nation. More importantly, we must also protect the millions of lives who depend on our full embrace of all forms of disaster prevention and resilience. Studies show similar barrier systems to the one we are requesting have an almost immediate return on investment. Hurricane Ida tested a similar barrier system in New Orleans. The system prevented a Hurricane Katrina-level surge, but it also more than paid for itself in prevented damages. I personally know far too well the devastating effects that hurricanes and large-scale flooding have on local economies and communities. These project priorities, requested by myself and equally supported across the aisle by my colleagues in the Greater Houston region delegation, benefit Texans in our home state and deliver major improvements to our nation. I thank the subcommittee and the full committee for their work on these critical issues, and I look forward to working with you through this process. I urge my colleagues on the committee to include these priorities in the passage of the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. Thank you for your time and consideration, and have a great day.
Thank you, Representative Garcia. Are there any questions of Ms. Garcia? Hearing none, thank you very much for your testimony, and we'll
Thank you,
move
Madam
on
Chair.
to the next member of Congress. I'd like to recognize our next witness, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Porter, for 5 minutes. Ms. Porter, you're on.
Thank you very much, Chair Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser, for providing us with this opportunity to share our district's priorities for the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. I'm here today to support the authorization of the Prado Basin Ecosystem Restoration Project, which is part of the dual-purpose Prado Basin Feasibility Study. This project would benefit Riverside County, San Bernardino County, and my home, Orange County, by reducing reliance on imported water from the Sacramento, San Joaquin River Delta, and Colorado rivers. It would reduce risk of wildfires, restore critical habitats for endangered species, create local jobs, and save money for consumers. The Prado Basin Ecosystem Restoration Project specifically targets the removal of an invasive plant species known as Arundo donax, commonly known as giant reed. The giant reed outcompetes native plant species and is not edible for native wildlife. It consumes a substantial amount of water compared to native flora, which reduces water supplies. Additionally, the giant reed plays a significant role in the ignition and rapid spread of wildfires during droughts due to its rapid growth and substantial water requirements. The Prado Basin Ecosystem Restoration Project will remove the giant reed and replace it with natural flora. This will reduce wildfire risk, increase water supplies, and help native species thrive. If this project were to be authorized, it would restore 606 acres of land along the Santa Ana River, Chino Creek, and Mill Creek, where endangered species such as the southwestern willow flycatcher live. The U.S. Forest Service listed the southwestern willow flycatcher as a federally endangered species in 1995, after years of dwindling population numbers due to the loss of their native riparian habitat. The Prado River Basin Ecosystem Restoration Project would restore habitats not only for the southwestern willow flycatcher, but for other endangered species as well. This restoration project would also create good jobs in my community. A report has estimated that for every $1 million spent on watershed restoration and management, we can create anywhere from 6.8 to 31.5 well-paying, good-paying jobs. Based on the average of these numbers, Orange County Water District has told me that this project could create around 931 direct, indirect, and induced jobs. In addition to creating jobs, the Prado Basin Feasibility Project would help our community reduce our carbon emissions. Importing water from the Colorado River and from Northern California is an energy-intensive process. Pumping the water over the Toho Mountains requires a substantial amount of energy, which also increases the cost of water when it reaches consumers in Southern California. The restoration of natural flora and the removal of the giant reed will save energy by significantly reducing our reliance on imported water. The average annual energy savings is 15 gigawatt hours, which translates to a reduction of 11,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. The environmental impact report was certified in May 2021, and that report concluded that this was the most efficient and most cost-effective plan compared to any proposed alternative. The Prado Dam feasibility study conducted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in cooperation with the Orange County Water District has similarly concluded that this project will provide ratepayers with net savings of $7.5 million. Now is the time for Congress to do our part and authorize this project. Thank you for your consideration of this matter. I urge my colleagues to support the authorization of the Prado Basin Ecosystem Restoration Project. And I'd like to thank the Orange County Water District for their leadership and Senator Padilla for his work introducing companion legislation to the Senate. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. As you know, the West is facing serious water supply challenges due to the drought. I've asked the court to consider engaging more on water supply issues at core projects. Why is this important?
Well, this project is really important to the entire ecosystem of Southern California. And one of the things about this project is that projects that we develop in Southern California will have the ability to also help preserve species and create water supply further upstream. So to the extent that we can remove this invasive species, we can reduce its water reliance on Southern California, preserving more of our water for ourselves. We're also going to have an upstream effect on our neighbors in the Colorado River and in Northern California.
Thank you very much. I find that quite interesting because I'm interested also in Whittier Narrows, which faces almost the same problem. And we're trying to get the Corps to finish the infrastructure damage in Whittier Narrows. Thank you very much, Ms. Porter. Next, I'd like to recognize our next member, the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Levy, for 5 minutes. You're on, ma'am. Phone.
Sorry, it's been a while. Thank you so much, Chairwoman. I really sincerely appreciate the opportunity to bring my residents, my district into the room, into Congress. This opportunity to try to prioritize some of the important work I think the Water Resources Development Act can do for frontline communities like mine is critical. The communities I represent, Chairwoman, in Southeast Michigan, communities like Detroit, Romulus, Inkster, and Dearborn Heights, they are frontline communities of this climate crisis. Last summer, these communities faced unprecedented flooding. We didn't merely experience 100-year rainfalls, we experienced 1,000-year rainfall. Our communities didn't even have the projections for these events at all. Some homes flooded repeatedly, some even up to 4 times within 2 months. Raw sewage flowed through the streets in my communities. The flood maps and projections within our communities that we rely on are inaccurate and don't account for our rapidly warming climate, and they're simply out of date. And the water infrastructure in these communities is woefully inadequate, as you know. Now extreme weather events are here, and many just don't want to do anything about it. I refuse to accept this as an option, Chairwoman. As the weather events increase with frequency, communities need the tools to be prepared. This year's WRDA, an opportunity for our neighbors to better understand the threats that we face due to climate change, and it can equip us with a resilient water infrastructure. First, I encourage the committee to please offer support for Detroit Division of the Army Corps of Engineers and their planning and identifying flood resilience for communities like those around Ecorse Creek. In Ecorse Creek, it impacts 9 communities in Wayne County, Michigan, which is the largest populated county in the state. I also encourage the Army Corps to conduct a feasibility study for flood risk management in southeastern Michigan. This is essential, Chairwoman. Third, I encourage the committee to broaden environmental assistance for Michigan by committing $35 million for projects like wastewater treatment, water supply, environmental restoration, and surface water resource protection. I'm so incredibly grateful to be joined by my good friend and neighbor, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, in these 3 asks. Many of our communities are intertwined and connected. Finally, while I applaud the committee for their work on the 2020 bill, I encourage the committee to truly incorporate the environmental justice components into drafting of the 2022 bill. The most daunting water infrastructure challenges our nations face are born directly to many of the nation's most vulnerable communities, neighborhoods like the one I grew up in, where I don't want, the kids in that community, again, that same neighborhood, to think that it's not normal to have clean water come through their faucet. That means doing even more, Chairwoman, to ensure that the Army Corps of Engineers has the tools and capacity to advance communities and support solutions in these, as they're again experiencing these impacts. We should also increase capacity and expertise within the Army Corps and give the public more meaningful opportunities to weigh in on the projects that affect their communities. We should continue increasing opportunities for assistance by building on and expanding the pilot program for economically disadvantaged communities. Please extend that pilot program, very essential. Finally, we must maximize toxic remediation and ecological restoration, navigation, and flood resilience projects. We must support minority-owned businesses, and we must continue developing and advancing, again, environmental justice innovation. I thank Congressman Stephen Cohen for joining me in this request as well, and for just a great ally in fighting for environmental justice. I appreciate the opportunity, Chairwoman, and all our committee members to share the priorities before this committee and respectively request their inclusion in the 2022 Water Resources Development Act. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Mr. Levy. Very well put. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'd like to recognize the next member, gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Allen, for 5 minutes. By the way, are there any questions of Mr. Levy? Hearing none? You're on, Mr. Allen. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairwoman, and thanks to the committee for allowing me to provide this testimony. and highlight water issues that are critical to the 12th Congressional District of Georgia, namely the issues we have experienced with the Corps of Engineers regarding the new Savannah Bluff Lock and Dam. This project, which is required for environmental mitigation as part of the Savannah River Harbor Expansion Project, or SHIP, is an issue with which my community has been at odds with the Corps of Engineers for more than 6 years. The Corps' insistence on removing and replacing the lock and dam with a rock weir that will significantly lower the existing pool would be catastrophic to our community. This historic lock and dam's importance to the Augusta River region cannot be overstated. 2 states, both Georgia and South Carolina, are affected, and businesses and municipalities rely on the pool of water maintained by this dam. If the dam were to be removed, quality of life for our entire region of the country would be negatively impacted. Flooding, which is normally mitigated using the lock and dam, could affect multiple cities on both sides of the river in times of heavy rain. And when the Corps conducted a simulation of their selected alternative, the effect on water level was so drastic that boats were marooned, businesses had issues being able to draw the water necessary to run their businesses, and the banks of the river were unstable to the point where they were falling in, resulting in the simulation being abandoned earlier than planned because of the damage. As the world gets a glimpse at Augusta in a few weeks as home of the prestigious Masters Golf Tournament, to cause the view from beautiful downtown Augusta to be that of areas of dry mud and silt instead of a flowing river would be unconscionable. In 2019, an independent peer review was conducted, and the report highlighted that there had been inconsistencies in cost analysis, lack of consideration of other mitigation alternatives that would not lower the pool, and lack of information on whether or not the leading alternatives would successfully pass fish overall. We should not spend taxpayer dollars on a rock weir that this report says may even kill the fish that we're trying to protect. The Corps and local stakeholders are now in court-ordered mediation after a federal judge ruled that the Corps was not following the word of law in the 2016 WIN Act when it comes to maintaining that pool. The WIN Act states that with modifications to accommodate fish passage, the structure is able to maintain the pool for navigation, water supply, and recreational activities as in existence of the date of enactment of this act. This ruling was a win for our local communities, and I'm hopeful for a positive outcome that maintains the pool and the required lock and dam. I ask the members of this committee to work with me and my colleague, Congressman Joe Wilson, to ensure that the interests of our local communities are protected when it comes to the new Savannah lock and dam. I appreciate your attention to this important priority for our home states of Georgia and South Carolina, and look forward to working with you through this process.
Thank you very much, Representative Allen. Are there any questions of Mr. Allen? Seeing and hearing none, thank you, sir.
Yes.
Mr. Soto, you recognize. I'd like to recognize our next member, gentleman from Florida, Mr. Soto, for 5 minutes. You're on, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Florida's 9th Congressional District is home to the Northern Everglades, starting just north of us, going all the way down through the Kissimmee chain of lakes in our district, through Lake Okeechobee and the Kissimmee River, and out to what we know of as the River of Grass, the Everglades. It's home to bald eagles, snail kites, championship bass fishing and boating, and my district also happens to be the fastest growing district in the nation. We grew 40% over these last 10 years according to the census. So there's been huge growth challenges with protecting the Kissimmee chain of lakes, which is why, first and foremost, we've worked on getting the Army Corps of Engineers to address issues with removal of aquatic growth, more specifically hydrilla, an issue that has continued to be a problem for both fishing and quality of life, for quality water, and for boating, as well as to help protect water flowing through the Everglades. And we appreciate the opportunity to be able to discuss that today. I have the honor of living right on Lake Toho in the Kissimmee chain of lakes and see it firsthand, along with my neighbors. In addition, we have project requests for the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Restoration Project, which would help with freshwater releases to the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie estuaries, as well as helping with the Kissimmee River channel. Not only is this critical for the Everglades, but also for endangered species like the manatee, which because of the flow of nutrients out of Lake O, we have seen it be in jeopardy. In addition, we have the North Lake Toho Restoration and Water Quality Project to help remove legacy sediments. For many years, north of us in Orange County, we saw many sediments flow into the Kissimmee Chain of Lakes. Thank God that stopped decades ago. But the legacy of that's still there. And so removing certain sediments for flood storage and flow through Mill Slough and East City Ditch are critical. We faced flooding there during Hurricane Irma back in 2017. Then there's the Lake Runny Mead Restoration Project, which also deals with vegetative growth, protecting ecological functions and fish habitat and wading birds. The nutrient load in East Lake Toho due to sediment flows from Lake Runnymede is also an issue facing the northern Everglades. But we can stop it. We can fix it with word of funding to protect both the quality of life in our district and critical species. In addition, the Lake Tehoppa-Caliga-Kissimmee Lakefront Restoration and Water Quality Improvement Project helps with the North Shore area of Lake Tehoppa-Caliga to allow ecosystems to flow through, similar themes throughout with hydrilla, with nutrient and sediment flows in the upper Kissimmee Basin. And then, of course, the Lancaster Park Floodplain Improvement Project to help Shingle Creek, the headwaters of the Everglades, and also a key water body flowing through Disney. Finally, we have the Polk County's Derby Ditch Drainage Improvement Project to help out another fast-growing area in Auburndale and Winter Haven, Florida. That is citrus country out there, and improve flooding that happened during Hurricane Irma. And Orange County's Aquifer Storage Reservoir, a chemical addition project, which would help improve clean drinking water in the Orange County area. Again, part of the fastest-growing areas in Central Florida. And with that, I want to yield back the remainder of my time, and am happy to answer questions, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Soto. Any questions of Mr. Soto? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony, and we will recognize our next member, Mr. Higgins from New York. You're on for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Chairs DeFazio, Napolitano, Ranking Members Graves and Rouser, members of the committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to advocate on behalf of my community to make sure that our freshwater sources in the Great Lakes continue to be preserved long into the future. One way this Congress can protect the health of the Great Lakes and Lake Erie is by proactively addressing the growing threat of harmful algal blooms and promoting clean drinking water infrastructure in this year's Water Resources Development Act. Harmful algae blooms are caused by non-point source pollution like nutrient runoff. They create dead zones where plants and animal life cannot survive. These toxic blooms emit damaging chemicals into bodies of water, and they are dangerous to humans. In 2014, an algal bloom in western Lake Erie near Toledo, Ohio, shut down the city's drinking water system for 2 complete days. Algal blooms have been spotted in eastern Lake Erie as well, near Presque Isle and Erie, Pennsylvania, 90 miles from Buffalo. The Army Corps has conducted pilot projects to fight algal blooms in Florida, as well as smaller lakes across New York State. But we need to take seriously the threat algal blooms pose to the health of one of our continent's largest sources of fresh water. This committee and this Congress should take this threat seriously and put forth resources to proactively address it. I have proposed language to begin this work at Lake Erie, and I respectfully request this committee include that proposal in your bill. I also urge this committee to fortify the infrastructure that our communities rely on to deliver clean drinking water. As water infrastructure ages, maintenance becomes a larger component of local government budgets. For example, the Colonel Ward Pumping Station and Filtration Plant is a critical piece of the city of Buffalo's drinking water system, a historic engineering achievement. At the time of its construction in the early 20th century, the pumping station's tunnels were the largest of their kind in all of the Great Lakes. Lake Erie's waves and ice have damaged the seawall protecting the pumping station and the adjacent Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Centennial Park, which is undergoing a renaissance of its own. The Army Corps has done good work to repair the north section of the seawall. I hope their work can continue at the southern piece to reinforce protection to the pumping station and park. I urge my colleagues to support these efforts to reinforce the progress we've made on the Great Lakes and protect our drinking water infrastructure. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Higgins, for your testimony. And are there any questions of Mr. Higgins? Hearing, seeing none? Thank you, sir. You're very welcome to any more comments you may have. And now I'd like to recognize our next member, gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer, for 5 minutes. You're on, sir.
Thank you, Chairwoman and Ranking Member. I greatly appreciate you hosting this important hearing and for having us here today. I appreciate you seeking input as we prepare a new Water Resources Development Act, and I'm here today to advocate for several water resource and water infrastructure priorities important in North Jersey. I have submitted 5 requests to the committee, and I'm hopeful they'll include them in the final WRDA or we enact this year. My requests include the following. First, to create an authority for the Army Corps of Engineers to be able to perform the design and construction of necessary remediation of hazardous, toxic, and radioactive waste contamination on projects as part of the construction of a project. We must take steps to protect our water, air, and our open spaces for our children and grandchildren, pragmatic, common-sense action in our fight for the future of our communities and our planet. Second, to create an authority that will allow reimbursement to homeowners for the costs of relocation and require upgrades as part of non-structural measures. Just look at Hurricane Ida and what it did in my state, from flooding homes and sadly taking so many lives. Every time we have another bad storm, it is costing insurers, taxpayers, and families a fortune. Third, along with Representative Tonko and as a co-sponsor, I have submitted the text of the New York-New Jersey Watershed Protection Act to the committee. This bill would include the adoption of a watershed-wide restoration strategy in consultation with the Corps of Engineers to coordinate, fund, and provide technical assistance for conservation and restoration activities that strengthen flood controls, restore outdated dams, improve water quality, and increase public access to these vital water resources. The New York-New Jersey watershed is home to more than 20 million people, more than 200 fish species, and some of the most endangered rivers in the United States due to the high levels of PCBs. Fourth, along with Representative Pasquale's office, I have submitted a request for the Corps of Engineers to partner with several North Jersey municipalities, including Lodi, Maywood, Rochelle Park, to conduct a feasibility study regarding flood controls. According to these local communities, flooding from Hurricane Ida caused significant damage, resulting in evacuations of hundreds of residents and seniors, with many still in temporary housing. We desperately need the federal government to step in and help residents, families, and local governments mitigate the problem before more disasters occur. Finally, I submitted a policy request to the committee granting the Corps of Engineers authority to study and address the impact of sea level rise on projects. Currently, sea level rise is only studied when its impacts are incorporated into coastal storm risk features that are authorized for construction. Sea level rise by itself is not examined if it is not related to a storm risk feature being authorized. This is problematic because an area where no coastal storm risk features are recommended may in fact be impacted by sea level rise in the future, but the Corps does not include that without a specifically recommended project feature. We're in the middle of a major climate crisis, as we all know, and if you look at the last few years, the unprecedented wildfires, record high temperatures, shorter winters, and rising water levels off the Jersey shore. For New Jersey and for our whole planet, we must take action that will help us tackle climate change now and not later, so that our country and state will have clean air and water for future generations. In addition to these priorities, I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight the critical water investments made in our historic, once-in-a-century bipartisan infrastructure bill last November, now being implemented across the country. Back home in Jersey, we have 350,000 lead service lines, according to the American Water Association. That's a lead pipe that connects a water main to premises like a home or school. We know that lead can have nefarious and terrible impacts on children, on their health, and on families. Overall, nationwide, our bipartisan infrastructure bill will make a $55 billion investment in clean drinking water, which represents the largest investment in American history to help our children and families. New Jersey will expect to claw back $1 billion over 5 years from the bipartisan infrastructure bill to improve water infrastructure across our state and to ensure that our clean, safe water is right for our kids, is there and right for our kids and families. Investments will go toward the replacement of lead service lines and toward emergencies involving lead in drinking water, assistance for small communities like those in Sussex and Warren counties and across North Jersey, and of course, help for schools across the 5th Congressional District. I've been helping lead the fight to make sure investment from the infrastructure bill goes to projects in North Jersey, including water infrastructure projects in Fair Lawn and flood mitigation in Hillsdale, New Milford, and Westwood. Making the investment we need to deliver clean drinking water to every American is a bipartisan issue that can bring everyone and must bring everyone together. Thank you so much for holding this important hearing and allowing me to discuss these critically important projects and issues facing our families and small businesses and communities in northern New Jersey. I'm confident that if we work together, we can mitigate flooding, combat climate change, and ensure we have clean drinking water for our communities. Thank you so much. I look forward to continuing to work with you on these important issues here in the greatest country in the world. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, sir. Mr. Geitheimer, it's very good to hear all of the things that you have mentioned. I think all of us have the same problems.
Thank you,
Somewhere.
Chairwoman. Thank you,
Thank you.
Chairwoman. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to recognize our next gentleman from California, Mr. Costa, for 5 minutes. He's online.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, for your leadership in this important hearing that your subcommittee is holding. And let me also take a moment to congratulate you on the award that you recently received from the Army Corps of Engineers and other water agencies. Well deserved for your countless efforts over the years on trying to address water needs, not only in California, but throughout our country. Congratulations, well deserved, and thank you. Madam Chairperson, ranking members, I want to provide members with the committee what I think are priorities and projects that obviously benefit my constituency, but I think have good best management practices for water use, not only in California, but throughout the country. Last year, Democrats and Republicans in Congress came together to pass a very, very important bipartisan infrastructure package. I continue to say and advocate for investments in our infrastructure that we've been living off those investments our parents and grandparents have made a generation or two ago. This passage of this important legislation last year, signed by the president, gives us an opportunity for us to begin making those investments that are long overdue. We have that opportunity to leverage this not only with federal funds, but in many cases with state and local dollars. This infrastructure that we have throughout our nation is aging. We know that. We absolutely have to continue to invest, I believe, in clean drinking water and watersheds to protect water quality. At the same time, we need to invest in California particularly, but elsewhere, to improve our water supply, a reliable water supply to protect communities in terms of the need to produce food. Food is a national security issue every day. Putting food on America's dinner table is really a national security issue, and we should treat it as such. But we also have flood control issues that we have to deal with as well. The reality of climate change, I think, has made supporting more reliable water reserves even more critical. We all know Western states are again experiencing severe drought conditions. According to some experts, this year was merely a continuation of the so-called mega drought that's been happening for now 20 years. I believe it's the new normal. We average waterfall and rainfall and water supply in California on 10-year averages. And when you look at the 10-year averages, we don't have the infrastructure that tries to provide the balance on years when we have above average rainfall and snow, on years where we have below average, and we are in one of those times. California 2021 was the second driest year in recorded spanning and then more than 100 years since we've been keeping records. Repeat that. 2021 was the second driest year in recorded history in California. More frequent and the more intense droughts caused by climate change require us to plan, to adapt, and to rethink how we manage our infrastructure and utilize our resources for our food, for our cities, and for the environment. I want, with that in mind, to highlight a couple of proposed resources in my district to reoperate the Red Bank and Fancher Creek projects. These reservoirs were originally designed primarily for flood control purposes, but local water managers are now rethinking and have a proposal that would reoperate these not only to provide for flood control, but to maximize groundwater recharge in wet years. I know the chairwoman has done really remarkable things in the Southern California Basin in her efforts to deal with recharge. This is a similar example. It's critical for improving long-term sustainability of depleted groundwater basins and for improving water supply reliability by having more water on hand in the dry years. And man, we are in those dry years. With ongoing drought and limited surface water supplies, we must use every tool in our water toolbox, to get much needed infrastructure in place. We also have the opportunity to use the Army Corps programs to enhance critical habitats for listed species, make ecosystem improvements to rivers and watersheds, such as efforts that we have been able to do in California. If done carefully and in collaboration with impacted stakeholders, we have the opportunity to not only provide greater water reliability, but also for improving and sustaining our agriculture, our food, which is obviously impacted by these drought conditions and the lack of investments. We also have an opportunity to deal with threatened and endangered species. In California, we are on the verge of trying a new approach to adaptive management in our water system, known as voluntary agreements. If successful, these voluntary agreements give us an opportunity to create more collaborative management structure to compare current regulatory efforts. This strategy would also avoid costly and time-consuming litigation. Being engaged in battles in courts do not resolve our water supply. This strategy would also avoid costly and time-consuming litigation, and it would also kickstart ecosystem restoration efforts that benefit some of the iconic rivers and improve our Bay Delta restoration.
Mr. Costa, your time is up.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and I look forward to working with you and the subcommittee as we deal with the importance of all of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, sir. And now I'll turn it over to Mr. Rouser to introduce the next member.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to recognize our next witness, the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Miller, for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chairman Napolitano, to address this committee on behalf of the constituents of the Illinois 15th District. On behalf of my constituents, I would like to highlight the need to improve our nation's traditional infrastructure, such as revitalizing our bridges and dams and facilitating commerce. This is why I wish the infrastructure bill was passed, fully focused on traditional infrastructure. I especially want to emphasize the need for continued work on Lock and Dam 25 in my district. Illinois' economy is diverse as it is supported by agriculture, energy, and manufacturing. These industries require a robust transportation network to get products to market. Nearly every bushel of soybeans, corn, and other grain transported along the Mississippi River from Illinois will pass through Lock and Dam 25. I appreciated President Trump's support for traditional infrastructure, and specifically for the upper Mississippi locks 20 through 25. Completing Lock and Dam 25 is critically important to grain handlers and agricultural exporters in my district and will increase U.S. agricultural competitiveness as a whole. I ask that the committee bear these priorities in mind when developing the Water Resources Development Act and keep radical Green New Deal priorities out of the bill, especially as we face $5 per gallon gasoline. Again, I thank you for your consideration and the chance to speak to you today. As a member of the Agriculture Committee, I look forward to working with your committee to address these issues, which are critically important to my fellow farmers. Thank you.
Now I'd like to recognize our next witness, the gentleman from California, Mr. Isa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser, for the leadership that you're supplying here today and for your giving me this opportunity. As the chair knows, as Californians, we have a phenomenon, which is the further north you go in California, the more rain you get. The further south you go, the less rain you get. I'm as far south as you can go, and if we get 7 inches in a good year, it's a really good year. That's one of the reasons that when I've reviewed the dozens of requests for specific programs, I looked at those that particularly would help us with the limited amount of water we have. My first request is the Padre Dam Municipal Water District, which is a key partnership for all of San Diego County. So even though it is in the East County Advanced Water Purification Program, it's actually a project uphill from all of the rest of San Diego County, and will bring 15 million gallons per day of what is now discharged wastewater. This project of reinjection and reuse is the kind of program that has zero new water and yet brings those 15 million gallons a day. I'm told that the support for the region will represent 30% of the region's drinking water demand. This project is supported by my partner downstream, Sarah Jacobs, and myself. My second project is one that my predecessors have worked on for many years, but we're really at a point where this final funding can make the final difference to complete this program. It's called the Escondido Creek Flood Control Project, and I'm doing this jointly. Currently, this is my entire district, but under the presumption of redistricting in California, Mr. Peters and myself will share this flood area. The project is right in the center, if you will, of Escondido, which is the second largest city in San Diego County. And it has currently groundwater infiltration creates a flood for 450 single and multifamily homes. By implementing this project, not only will we save the water for other use, but we will eliminate the flood insurance premiums paid for by these individuals. And this would conclude the project with the matching funds coming from other sources. Third is one that is particularly near and dear. Although I had many applications, only one matured sufficient to ask for it. As you may know, the 50th Congressional District enjoys more federally recognized tribes than almost all other districts combined, with 18 tribal communities. In this case, the Rincon Band of Lucenio Indians is seeking approximately 1 mile of water distribution line, which they are providing the additional funds for reclaimed water. Currently, the tribe relies entirely on well water, and this discharge recapture will literally create new water where it otherwise wouldn't be. One of the advantages of this tribe's application is that they have fully funded their portion of it, and it is supported by the surrounding communities. All of these projects are supported by local funding matches and recognized by the Army Corps of Engineers as appropriate for designation as environmental infrastructure under the Water Development Resources Act. Again, I'm in the driest part of the state. Each one of these represents not new sources of water, but new uses of water in our dry area. So I hope that you'll see these as particularly noteworthy. Again, there were many more applications that we did not forward because we felt that we should focus on the ones that had the most immediate benefit to the area, and ones where you could look and say, you do this you dramatically improve water quality for the people of San Diego and Riverside County. I want to thank you for your indulgence and yield back my 6 seconds.
We thank our friend from California. Are there any questions for our friend from California? Seeing none, we'll move to our next witness. I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Ranking Member, for the chance to share how vital the Water Resources Development Act is for Florida. And a special thanks to Chairman DeFazio for his leadership on this committee over the years. His knowledge and expertise will be sorely missed by everyone in Congress. Chairman DeFazio was critical in developing the Bipartisan Water Resources Development Act, which authorizes Army Corps of Engineers civil works activities. From restoring the Everglades and investing in our ports, to fighting rising seas by nourishing beaches and managing flood risk, Florida engages with the Army Corps of Engineers on so many urgent fronts. Few are more critical than the deepening and widening of Port Everglades in my congressional district, a project that will dramatically improve supply chain efficiencies and port operations. And while I could spend an hour on the ups and downs of this project, I'm going to bottom line it for you. In an effort to protect vital coral reef and other environmental assets, the cost of the Port Everglades deepening and widening project rose significantly, well above the authorized limit approved by this committee in WRDA 2016. Typically, the Corps would produce what's known as a post-authorization change report to substantiate their increased cost. However, my colleagues from Florida and I asked that the increased cost be approved through this WRDA bill, as was done for previous projects as recently as the Water Resources Development Act of 2020. Because without the language now, the port will be on the hook for the entire increased cost of the project, or it will stop while we wait for WRDA 2024. As America wrestles with supply chain issues, neither option is acceptable. One reason for the increased costs is because we learned lessons from other widening and deepening projects. Our port professionals and the Army Corps learned from experiences that we must take time to understand potential impacts this could have on our cherished coral reefs. Despite the cost increases and setbacks, we have made substantial progress already. The revised supplemental EIS is currently open for public comment, and the reconfiguration of the Coast Guard Station, Fort Lauderdale, the first construction portion of this project, is scheduled to break ground next spring. This will be a brand new state-of-the-art facility for our Coast Guard, which is badly needed and long overdue. Finally. It's hard to believe that the Port Everglades project, Madam Chair, began in 1996. That's 26 years ago. Under ideal circumstances, including this authorization being included in this WRDA bill, construction won't be complete before 2032, another 10 years from now. We cannot wait any longer for the Port Everglades deepening and widening project to begin. I look forward to working with you further on this and getting the project authorization increase approved in this WRDA bill. Another issue I want to bring to your attention is related to the extension of 2 beach renourishment projects in Broward County, both of which expire soon. The recently introduced SHORE Act would reauthorize both projects, as well as other projects in Florida and elsewhere for an additional 50 years. I support reauthorizing these projects in this WRDA bill and appreciate your ongoing attention to the extension of shore protection projects that will expire soon. And finally, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the importance of the Everglades, which many of us refer to as the river of grass, not the port I just referred to. But thanks to the Biden administration, we secured $1.1 billion in funding for Everglades restoration through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. To continue this recent historic progress, we must continue to advance projects that remove barriers to sending water south and restore the historic flow paths of the Everglades. To do this, the Army Corps needs flexibilities to fund large-scale projects. For example, the Army Corps could fund larger SERP projects by utilizing an incremental funding approach. We can help advance these projects by providing this flexibility in the WRDA bill, and I look forward to working with the committee on this and your leadership. Thank you for your efforts to develop and pass a new WRDA bill in the 117th Congress, and I appreciate the work that you put into this legislation and look forward to helping you pass this bill this year. Thank you so much, Madam Chair and Ranking Member.
We thank the gentlelady. Are there any questions for the gentlelady from Florida?
Good work.
Thank you.
Seeing none, now take the opportunity to introduce our good friend from Washington, Mr. Newhouse, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, as well as members of the committee. First, I want to thank you for hosting this Members' Day hearing. It's certainly my honor to be here representing my district in the state of Washington. For more than 30 years, misinformed interest groups have held Central Washington and the Pacific Northwest hostage by threatening to drain the lifeblood of our region. So I'm going to ask you to not include something in this legislation. These groups, in my opinion, are driven by a singular ideological goal: breaching the Snake River dams. They have placed a bullseye on our river system and this critical infrastructure which provides clean, carbon-free energy throughout the region, provides water for our crops, and transportation to move our goods to export markets. Millions in taxpayer dollars have been spent funding federal scientists, engineers, and fish experts in the Obama administration to develop a years-long analysis fine-tuning the operations of the federal river power system. Putting this plan to work, our region continued to harness the power of our rivers for clean, carbon-free hydroelectric power while balancing the needs of our native salmon species. However, for organizations fixated on free-flowing rivers as the only means for achieving environmental success, it has not been enough. They've sued the Obama administration, they sued the Trump administration, and they continue today by suing the Biden administration. So members of the committee, Washington Governor Jay Inslee, as well as Senator Patty Murray, are now looking at your bill as a vehicle to waste taxpayer dollars by forcing another duplicative study in order to seek their own desired outcome. Dam breaching advocates have blinded themselves to the countless other benefits our dams provide for our region, not to mention the great strides our salmon populations have made over the last several years, even amidst the rising ocean temperatures and record levels of pollution in Puget Sound. If these interest groups were truly concerned with our river system, they would look at the science. They would acknowledge the millions of tons of carbon these dams prevent from entering our atmosphere. They would acknowledge our dams utilize world-class technology and engineering to support the most efficient production of carbon-free electricity while also improving fish passage rates between 93 and 96%. Well, I could list data point after data point outlining the vast strides that have been made in preserving and restoring our native salmon populations. It can be better summed up by the 4-year federal environmental study released in 2020 that advised against breaching the lower Snake River dams, which explicitly stated that the dams are not likely to jeopardize the continued existence of the ESA-listed species. I'd be remiss if I did not mention how our dams and the rivers provide a sustainable and efficient way to transport our nation's crops. Barging on the Columbian Snake keep 700,000 semi-trucks off the roads and their emissions out of the air every year. The rivers alone barge more than 50% of U.S. wheat destined for export. It's clear that many of these dam breaching proponents have long since stopped caring about the salmon or the benefits of the river system. The fact that the Department of Justice announced a settlement to stay the most recent legal attack on the river until July of this year, coincidentally, the same date, Senator and the governor announced they would release their plans, demonstrates a predetermined backdoor deal is in the works, and they intend to weaponize WRDA in order to achieve their desired outcome. For those of us who truly care about our region, these actions are deeply disturbing. Breaching our dams is simply not an option, and endless cycles of litigation and continued studies only put our region at risk. In Central Washington, we're all actively working toward a clean energy future, strengthening our nation's supply chain, feeding the world, and protecting our native wildlife. The rivers, dams are at the center of it all, serving an example for the rest of the world. As I've said for years, dams and fish can coexist, and I'll continue to fight for our dams, and I call on these misguided groups to stop playing politics and pay attention to the science, which clearly states we are making advancements in the right direction. So I urge the committee to reject any proposal to insert yet another duplicative study in this bill, which will only lend more uncertainty for our way of life in Central Washington and throughout the Pacific Northwest. I thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman from Washington. Are there any questions for the gentleman from Washington? If not, I believe the gentleman from Washington has a letter that he wanted to submit for the record. Do you want to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a March 8th, 2022 letter to the EPA Administrator and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works regarding the waters of the United States rulemaking process?
Appreciate that very much, Mr. Rankin.
So ordered.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to recognize our good friend from Oregon, Mr. Schrader, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, Ranking Member, and the rest of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee members for hosting this event. The success that WRDA has had during these divided times is a testament to the committee's willingness to work across the aisle. I hope this work will be just as successful for WRDA 2022. With the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, our definition of what constitutes infrastructure has grown. This paradigm shift is most notable in the water project funding we included in the law, which has been allocated for districts across the country. I'm actually very hopeful the committee's work here will build on that success and tackle the many backlog projects that are sadly still unfunded, even with increased investments. With IJA passed and having fully funded the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, we should have extraordinary opportunity to meet the needs of all our districts. One such project that crosses these jurisdictional boundaries is the Newport Big Creek Dam Improvement Project. I mentioned this project during WRDA Member Day 2020 and would like to highlight it again as a project that has a real critical impact on my constituents. With an estimated total cost of $80 million, this project is far too large for the small city of Newport, Oregon, to tackle on its own. The goal here is to replace the woefully outdated Big Creek Dam, which holds Newport's municipal water supply. The current dams were originally built in 1958. 1958. Today, they have deteriorated to the point where they could completely fail in the event of an earthquake registering just at 3.5 or higher. Should these dams fail, the flows would breach Highway 101, the only transportation road on the Oregon coast, and destroy much of downtown Newport without warning. The city is currently investigating multiple money sources, including state funding and Federal Emergency Management Agency High Hazard Potential Dam Grant Program funding, since the full cost is too great to be borne solely by a local bond. Your staff's been very helpful, thank you, in finding federal solutions to this problem, and I hope that will continue during this process. Failure of this dam due to an earthquake would be devastating for a variety of reasons: loss of life, impact on the local economy, and loss of critical water supply. Without this dam, 10,000 year-round residents, nearly 2.5 million tourists would be without water for at least a year, and the economic cost to grow to nearly $2 billion if left unattended for the next 5 years. Currently, the city has stepped up and invested $6 million between government grants and water revenue. State of Oregon has stepped up and is investing $14 million across 2022 and 2023 to complete the design and permitting phases. But the state still needs to raise another $60 million in construction funds, an amount too great for a small city like Newport. On a separate note, I've also represented this Oregon coast for the past 10 years, and one of the top issues that I keep hearing about from all my folks back home is dredging, the lifeblood of a lot of small ports on the Oregon coast, I dare say the Gulf of Mexico and East Coast as well. Unfortunately, our small communities are often left out of the dredging discussion. We need to offer a more consistent way of providing this critical service to all our small ports. Dredge ports and harbors limit economic activity and force operators to forego important upgrades to their facilities that could improve the well-being of their community. So, thank you again for the opportunity to testify about my priorities in Oregon's 5th Congressional District. Look forward to working with the committee staff in the productive way we've done so far and seeing the committee's final work product. Thank you very, very much.
We thank the gentleman from Oregon. Are there any questions for the gentleman from Oregon? Seeing none, good to have you here with us. Now I'd like to recognize our next witness, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of projects of critical importance in my district in New York's capital region, as you consider a reauthorization of the Water Resources Development Act. My constituents reside at the confluence of the mighty and historic Hudson and Mohawk rivers that helped shape America centuries ago by powering factories and mills and supporting the Erie Canal that transported goods from coast to the rest of the nation, inspiring a westward movement. The region is part of the New York-New Jersey Watershed, an economic engine, home to 20 million people, 6 major rivers, and more than 200 fish species. For too long, our watershed has faced extreme pressures from sea level rise and flooding, hundreds of outdated dams, and legacy pollutants. The deaths of dozens of residents from Hurricane Ida and $100 billion of damage from Superstorm Sandy remain fresh in our minds and must compel us to take action to prevent such tragic and costly events in the future. If we do not, sea level rise is expected to impact 9,000 acres of riverfront lands this century in the Hudson Valley alone. It is also estimated that 40 dams in the region will need to be targeted for removal each year, costing some $20 million annually. I am indeed proud to have worked closely with a coalition of more than 50 community groups and state and local governments to replicate successful federal programs, such as the Delaware River Basin Conservation Program, signed into law in the 2016 WRDA, to fill a critical conservation gap in our region. The requested bill language will coordinate restoration activities to improve water quality, remove obsolete dams, improve critical flood controls, and promote healthy ecosystems. Like the Delaware River Program, our watershed program would be housed in the Fish and Wildlife Service. However, I have ensured that consultation with the Army Corps will be a central component. This language has bipartisan support, and it advanced successfully through a hearing and markup in the Natural Resources Committee earlier this year. I am continuing conversations with my colleagues across the aisle to expand this bipartisan support even further and address any remaining concerns. Given the critical role of the Army Corps in these restoration activities, I respectfully urge the committee to consider this request as well as a targeted study of the Mohawk River Basin to make recommendations for the protection of its water and cultural resources. Our watershed must be considered amongst our nation's most significant water bodies and receive the same federal support so that it can remain a vital water resource and national economic engine for generations to come. In addition, I'm grateful for the work the Army Corps is doing, not just to protect our shores and waterways, but also to make use of these treasured resources to produce clean energy, drive down costs, and combat climate change. To strengthen these efforts, I urge the committee to incorporate floating solar energy in this year's WRDA reauthorization. Floating solar offers tremendous opportunity to expand our renewable energy deployment while benefiting threatened water systems. 10% of America's electricity needs could indeed be met by deploying floating solar on our country's human-made reservoirs, many of which are owned and operated by the Army Corps. I acknowledge that not every Army Corps facility will be appropriate, but I believe it's important that the Corps begin to consider the possibility of these projects, which can take advantage of existing grid infrastructure and complement existing hydropower resources. I urge the committee to adopt language I was proud to submit with my colleague, Congressman Huffman, that would identify promising reservoirs and launch a demonstration project. This technology is already emerging as a promising industry. I'm thrilled to report that a community in my district, Cohoes, New York, received funding in the FY22 appropriations package to install floating solar panels on a municipal reservoir. This effort should serve as a model for the Army Corps and communities across our nation as we scale this technology, implement smart, clean energy systems, and drive down those consumer costs. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify and for your continued work to strengthen and protect our nation's vital water resources. With that, I yield back and thank you again for the opportunity.
We thank the gentleman. Are there any questions for the gentleman? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Rouser.
Thank you. Our next witness I'd like to recognize is the good gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Carter, for 5 minutes. Buddy, you're up. Can you hear us? You're muted. You're muted.
I'm sorry, they got me in timeout over here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee today. I have the honor and privilege of representing the 1st Congressional District of Georgia. We have over 100 miles of pristine coastline, 2 major seaports, tourism, seafood, and more. The coastline is integral to our economy and to the quality of life. But like most of the East Coast, our area has been hit by many hurricanes in the last few years. The city of Tybee Island in Chatham County is taking these natural disasters very seriously and is a model for cities across the country that are trying to prepare for these weather crises. Among other things, the city is working on a major beach renourishment project that uses federal funds authorized through the Water Resources Development Act. However, the Corps of Engineers, in its latest cost-benefit analysis study, jeopardizes the project's future beyond 2023. Because of language in WRDA, the Corps is forced to use an outdated cost-benefit model, which in Tybee's case can only look at damages that might occur within the next 15 years. Tybee, though, won't see damages until 2060. Which is largely due to the hard work and financial investments they've been putting into the island in order to protect itself from weather events. My staff has discussed this issue with the Army Corps of Engineers, T&I committee staff, and other member offices, and we believe we have some legislative language that would fix this situation. The language specifically authorizes the Secretary to recommend that Congress authorize up to 50 years of nourishment to begin on the date of construction and adds general study authority to extend the period of nourishment for up to an additional 50 years after expiration of the original authorized period of nourishment. I've submitted the necessary language to this committee for your consideration, which also includes a request that the Corps include an area's tourism impact into its National Economic Development Assessment for a beach renourishment project's cost-benefit ratio. I would strongly encourage you to include my language in this year's version of WRDA. Simply put, we need to ensure that our community is becoming more resilient in the face of these storms. But with WRDA's current language on cost-benefit analysis, we're punishing communities who are trying to take those steps. In addition to the great need on Tybee, I've also offered language in this year's WRDA, along with my friend and colleague, Representative Sanford Bishop. The language requests a study which would determine the feasibility of widening the Savannah Harbor in the 1st District. This widening would accommodate a greater throughput of larger vessels that would in turn ensure the South's busiest port can keep pace with the ever-growing demand for maritime shipping. Over the years, large vessels transporting containerized cargo have increased in both length and width since design of the existing project. In fact, there are multiple locations within the federal channel where vessels experience navigational challenges due to vessel size. Larger container vessels are experiencing transportation cost inefficiencies due to these restrictions at targeted areas within the confined federal channel. As a result, the current channel conditions limit the available operating times for large vessels and contribute to ship delays and supply chain restrictions. If this study were included, it would investigate the possible harbor improvements to the Savannah Harbor Expansion Project, and I believe would increase transportation efficiency and improve vessel safety and handling in the harbor. This optimization is important since the existing federal channel was designed to accommodate a vessel fleet dominated by those with an 8,500 TEU capacity. Furthermore, the design revision would allow the project to serve a fleet dominated by vessels with nearly twice that capacity. which more accurately represents the vessels currently calling on the Port of Savannah. I know that modifying the harbor to accommodate these larger vessels will help to expand the channel's capacity, accommodate increasing cargo volume demands, and significantly enhance global connectivity for American businesses and consumers. As mentioned earlier, our district is blessed to have so much opportunity for economic growth and increased quality of life along the coast. We must make the necessary investments, which will not only help many of my constituents, but also so many throughout our country as our seaport continues to grow. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for the opportunity to speak here today, and I yield back.
We thank the gentleman from Georgia. Are there any questions for the gentleman? Hearing none, we'll move on to our next witness. I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Schreier, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. I am delighted to have the opportunity to talk with you today about two issues of real importance to me. One is fish passage at the Howard Hansen Dam, and also language from the 21st Century Dams Act. Let me tell you the story of Howard Hansen Dam and our federal obligation to provide downstream fish passage. Howard Hansen Dam is an earthen dam that was constructed in 1961. It sits along the Green River and provides essential flood control that protects thousands of homes, businesses, and industries, particularly in Auburn and nearby cities in the Green River Valley. It also provides safe drinking water to the city of Tacoma and surrounding communities, including underserved areas. Like many dams, though, it was built at a time when not much consideration was given to fish passage. But this river provides critical habitat for endangered salmon species, and therefore is also critical to the species that rely on the Chinook, such as the southern resident orca. Now, the Army Corps is required to create fish passage at the dam to improve the recovery of salmon and steelhead listed under the Endangered Species Act, and to uphold the federal government's treaty and trust responsibility to Native American tribes. Work on this project was authorized in 1999, but the Army Corps work stopped 10 years later when costs exceeded expectations. In the meantime, local governments, including the city of Tacoma, utilities, tribes, have all fulfilled their part of the deal, putting millions of dollars into upstream fish passage. I want to emphasize here that there are few projects out there that have such a broad base of support. There is virtually no opposition to finishing the fish passage project at Howard Hansen Dam. In fact, all members of our Washington delegation, Democrats and Republicans, signed on to my letter calling for completion of the fish passage study and the project itself. State, local, tribal entities all concur. The public concurs. The reason that restoring upstream and downstream fish passage in this river, well, it is so important is that it opens up over 100 miles of pristine spawning habitat in areas that are inaccessible to people. And it stands to do more for Chinook salmon recovery and our orca population than any other project to date, even the Elwha Dam removal. It is a very big deal. Of note, the upstream passage is done. It was completed by local stakeholders, but we can't send salmon upstream to spawn if there's no downstream passage for the smolts. Budget information and funding are really the only things standing in the way. Last night, my staff received word that the Corps has been able to push up their schedule significantly in order to meet funding deadlines, so the project is in a much better position to make this year's WRDA. I respectfully request that full consideration be given to this project in this year's WRDA. According to the biological opinion, they have only until 2030 to complete the downstream fish passage facility, and we can't afford to wait any longer and must collectively act, as our delegation has and as local stakeholders have, towards seeing this project through to completion. In my remaining time, I just want to take a moment to touch on the 21st Century Dams Act. There's a theme here. You know, there are provisions in this act that are critical all over this country, but particularly for the Northwest. I submitted language which included a suite of infrastructure investments in the nation's more than 90,000 dams to improve public safety, enhance clean energy output, and restore the health of our nation's rivers and ecosystems. This request provides needed investment as well as improvements to critical dam safety programs, easier access to funding for smaller state programs, and it exempts small underserved communities from cost-sharing requirements. So please give consideration to that as well. Thank you very much for your attention to these two very important issues.
We thank the gentlelady. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next witness, the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Trahan, for 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding today's hearing and for the opportunity to testify today. By including these priorities as we reauthorize the Water Resources Development Act, we'll be able to undertake critical water development projects that benefit communities across our country. In my district, Massachusetts 3, combined sewage overflows, or CSOs, are an all too familiar issue. In fact, many of my colleagues have come to know me as the sewage lady here in Congress because of how much I talk about the need to stop sewage overflows. So I don't think it was a surprise for anyone when I used the 5 environmental infrastructure requests that each member was allotted to request authorizations of $20 million each to fix the CSOs in Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, Methuen, and Fitchburg. CSOs are an issue that have plagued my district for as long as I can remember. It was an issue when I toured Lowell's regional wastewater utilities facility as part of my first infrastructure tour after being elected to the Congress just 3 years ago. And it remains an issue to this day. In fact, I was just at that same facility again a few weeks ago. And each year, hundreds of millions of gallons of waste are dumped into the Merrimack River from Manchester, New Hampshire to Lowell, and all the way out to the mouth of the river in Newburyport. And honestly, that's probably a conservative estimate based on some of the heavy rain years that we've had recently. In addition to polluting the treasure that is our river, the human health effects from CSOs are also cause for alarm. 600,000 people rely on the Merrimack as their main drinking water supply, and our gateway cities are continuing to grow. The same is true with the Nashua River, where Fitchburg's sewage overflows. So Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, Methuen, and Fitchburg have each taken a number of steps to drive down the amount of sewage that must be discharged each year, and I certainly commend their leadership on that. But each of us knows that this doesn't get fixed without a serious course correction at the federal level. Now, the bipartisan infrastructure law is an excellent start. Already, the EPA has provided $188 million this year alone for water infrastructure projects, including CSOs in Massachusetts. But still, fixing CSOs is not cheap. Over the last 15 years, Lowell has invested $150 million in CSO control projects, resulting in a 60% reduction in annual volume of CSO discharges. And even so, an average of 300 to 450 million gallons of raw sewage are released into the river each year. Overall, the city estimates it will cost roughly $400 million to eliminate all CSO discharges from its sewer systems. Lawrence, Haverhill, Fitchburg, and Methuen also face the daunting prospect of multi-million-dollar projects to fix their CSOs. The same is true for Manchester, New Hampshire, which is further upstream along the Merrimack. In fact, Manchester dumps 221 million gallons in CSOs into the Merrimack each year. And that is why my good friend, Mr. Pappas, a member of this committee, also requested a $20 million authorization to help Manchester fix its sewage system. I strongly support this request, and I thank him for making it. After all, we are all part of the Merrimack River ecosystem, and sewage in the river in Manchester eventually works its way to Lowell, to Methuen, to Lawrence, and to Haverhill. So Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, my colleagues on the committee, I'm not asking for an authorization to fix all of the sewage systems in my district, but I am asking for your help to make a dent. $20 million authorizations for each of these 5 cities will go a long way to cleaning up our drinking water and improving the health of hundreds of thousands of people in my district. So thank you again for the opportunity to testify today and for considering my requests. I look forward to working with all of you as we craft WERDA and find ways to help the communities we serve. Thank you. I yield back.
Well, thank you very much. Very interesting. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next witness. Online, I'd like to recognize the gentlewoman from Delaware, Ms. Blunt Rochester, for 5 minutes.
Chair Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and members of the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to testify at this Members' Day hearing on the proposals for a Water Resources Development Act of 2022. I come from the state of Delaware, where we feel the impacts of sea level rise daily. As the state with the lowest mean elevation, our coastal and riverbank communities have for decades fought the effects of climate change. Every day I hear from my constituents the urgent need to protect and invest in our shorelines and riverbanks. Thousands of Delawareans have felt the impact of shoreline riverbank erosion. Just last September, Hurricane Ida caused historic flooding in the downtown Wilmington area and overflowing Brandywine River, causing displacement of families. And last October, following a nor'easter, high tides caused extensive erosion, dune damage, and flooding to our beaches and beach communities in Sussex County. And as Delawareans, we are not only concerned about the damage to our homes, but we're also concerned about how the ongoing impacts of climate change and extreme weather events will impact our state's economy and natural heritage. Not only do Delaware beaches provide an important natural defense between the rising seawater and our homes and roads, they also provide a recreational space for the more than 9 million visitors that come to our beaches every year and are home to a diverse collection of plants and animals, including the celebrated horseshoe crab. For over 20 years, the state of Delaware and its local communities have worked in tandem with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to address shoreline and riverbank erosion and protect Delaware communities through the construction and maintenance of coastal storm risk management projects. Although the Philadelphia District has been a great partner, the Corps simply doesn't have the funding and the authority they need to protect the communities in Delaware from storms and rising sea levels. Fortunately, we have the opportunity in WRDA to empower the Corps to do more. We can and must provide them with the additional funding, resources, and authority to protect our shorelines and riverbanks and the communities that surround them. That's why earlier this year, I was proud to introduce HR 6705, the bicameral and bipartisan Shoreline Health Oversight Restoration, Resilient, and Enhancement Act, otherwise known as the SHORE Act, along with my colleague, Representative Garrett Graves from Louisiana, and Senators Carper and Cassidy. The SHORE Act elevates shoreline and riverbank protection and restoration as a primary mission of the Army Corps, and expands the Corps' existing river flood mitigation and restoration authority. It gives the Corps the tools it needs to safeguard our riverbanks, coastlines, and coastal communities against flooding, promoting resilient and sustainable natural projects that address climate change. Additionally, the inclusion of this legislation will make it easier for our low wealth and under-resourced communities to partner with the Corps by reducing cost sharing. And it works to ensure that project implementation is more flexible and more efficient. I support the full inclusion of the SHORE Act in the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. And while the SHORE Act is my top priority for WRDA, I'd also like to advocate for 3 additional priorities that are important for my constituents. First, I'd like to advocate for the inclusion of Newcastle County to the list of eligible entities under the Environmental Infrastructure Program, which will allow the county to pursue funding for critical wastewater and storm water system improvements and infrastructure. Second, I'd also like to advocate for funding to rehabilitate, retrofit, and remove dams across the county, across the country to help improve public safety. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers Infrastructure Report Card, Delaware has over 63 high hazard dams. Delaware also has small low head dams, including dams along the Brandywine River, which are not only safety hazards, but also impact the river's natural ecosystem and biodiversity. And third, I'd like to advocate for the expansion of the existing environmental infrastructure project in southeastern Pennsylvania to include the lower Delaware River Basin, which would expand the reach of the existing project and help abate flooding in the basin. I want to thank the committee for your tireless commitment and work on this legislation. And on behalf of the First State, thank you for your consideration. And I look forward to working with you all.
Are there any questions for the gentlewoman? Seeing none, we thank her for her testimony, and we'll now move forward to recognize the next witness, the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Ming, for 5 minutes.
Chair Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and distinguished members of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment, thank you for allowing me to testify today. I'm honored to share with you all my priorities as the committee considers reauthorization of the 2022 Water Resources Development Act that will support the safety and well-being of my constituents in Queens, New York. Last September, the remnants of Hurricane Ida caused record rainfall in New York City. Indeed, the National Weather Service for the first time issued a flash flood emergency for the city. The downpour caused massive flooding where the streets literally became rivers and waterfalls poured down into the subway system. Queens was hit particularly hard, and many of my constituents suffered devastating losses. Many were left without a home, a car, or their possessions. Tragically, 16 New Yorkers lost their lives in the storm, including 13 individuals who succumbed to the catastrophic flooding. Of those 16 deaths, 6 were my constituents. Many of the storm's victims died in their own homes. They lived in basement apartments that flooded too quickly within seconds for them to escape. This catastrophic flooding happened because New York City's sewer and water management systems were not built to handle the volume of rainfall from the storm. According to city officials, the water management system in New York City, which was built over a century ago, can only handle rainfall that is less than 2 inches per hour. At its peak, Ida's rainfall was over 3 inches per hour in parts of the city, far too fast and heavy for the existing infrastructure to handle. New York City was unprepared for Ida and remains unprepared for another storm of its magnitude. And Hurricane Ida is not an isolated incident. Just 2 weeks before Ida, Tropical Storm Henry also broke the existing record for rainfall in an hour in New York City. In fact, 4 of the 20 heaviest downpours in New York all happened within the last year. As climate change continues to cause more and more severe weather-related storms and natural disasters, we are going to see more events like Ida. We need to ensure that our communities are resilient to meet the challenges ahead. And New York City needs help to prevent Hurricane Ida's tragedies from repeating themselves. The 4 environmental infrastructure projects that I bring before the committee's consideration will bring invaluable help for New York City to make its sewer and water management systems more resilient to heavy rainfall and will lower the risk of flooding and, by extension, death. These projects will install new water mains and rehabilitate or replace sewer lines to improve stormwater management. They will improve drinking water distribution, reduce sewer backups, and relieve flooding. Investing in New York City's water and sewer system is crucial to saving the lives and the livelihoods of my constituents as we continue to encounter the threat from climate change and extreme weather. Thank you again for your time and consideration of these matters. I ask that the chair and ranking member consider my projects for inclusion in this year's WRDA reauthorization to protect the people and families of Queens. And I yield back.
Are there any questions for the gentlewoman? Seeing none, we thank her, And we'll move to our next witness, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Mervin, for 5 minutes.
Chairman DeFazio and Ranking Member Graves, Subcommittee Chair Napolitano, and Ranking Member Rouser, I appreciate the opportunity to testify at today's hearing on the Water Resource Development Act of 2022. On behalf of Indiana's 1st Congressional District, located in the environs of Chicago and home to 44 miles of Lake Michigan shoreline, I'm seeking an increase of $25 million in the federal authorization for Section 219, Calumet Region Environmental Infrastructure Authority, from $100 million to $125 million. The Calumet Region Environmental Infrastructure Authority allows the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to provide technical planning, design, and construction to non-federal interests who environmental infrastructure needs in Indiana's 1st Congressional District. These needs include development of wastewater treatment and related facilities and water supply treatment and distribution facilities. Over the past decades, this program authority has been integral in the efforts of local communities to improve our quality of place, safeguard the public health, and improve sustainability of water resources. Northwest Indiana is home to major industrial and manufacturing interests, and our communities rely on sewer systems that are currently operating beyond their expected life cycle. This situation has resulted in frequent sewage backups in environmental justice communities. During more frequent significant weather events, untreated municipality discharge empty in the Lake Michigan, which poses a public health and environmental threat to our region and beyond. A $25 million increase in Section 219 funding authority for the Calumet Region Environmental Infrastructure Authority will ensure continued construction assistance that will eliminate or improve combined sewer systems, reduce pollution in our waterways, remove failing septic systems, and provide clean drinking water, as well as an additional water-related infrastructure designed to protect area rivers and streams leading into Lake Michigan. In conclusion, I am requesting a $25 million increase in Section 219, Calumet Region Environmental Infrastructure Authority, and believe that this authority remains an indispensable resource for Northwest Indiana to grow our economy and improve our quality of life. Thank you again for hosting this hearing and for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your testimony, reclaiming my time. I would very much like to recognize our next witness, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Foster, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser, and thank you for holding this Members' Day hearing. And to all the members of the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment for allowing me to testify here today. I am here this morning to urge full federal funding for the remaining design, construction, operation, maintenance, repair, replacement, and rehabilitation of the Brandon Road Asian Carp Barrier and Lock and Dam project in my district, and to request that Will County be included in the United States Army Corps of Engineers Section 219 Environmental Infrastructure Authorization. The Brandon Road Lock and Dam, located on the Des Plaines River in Joliet, Illinois, serves as the last line of defense to prevent the spread of Asian carp and other aquatic invasive species from reaching Lake Michigan and all the tributaries and lakes in the Great Lakes Basin. Asian carp were first introduced in Arkansas and have traveled up the Mississippi River. If this species reaches the Great Lakes, it would create an environmental and economic catastrophe throughout the upper Midwest. And that is why supporting the Brandon Road Lock and Dam project has always been one of my greatest priorities. I commend the federal government's recognition of the importance of the Brandon Road Lock and Dam project through past legislative and agency actions. Most recently, the U.S. Corps of Engineers announced $225 million to move forward on this project. Thanks to the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, the Army Corps of Engineers finally has the resources it needs to finish planning and begin construction of this critical project that will help protect Illinois waterways and the rivers and lakes that define the Great Lakes region. Illinois and the Great Lakes states did not create this Asian carp problem, and we should not be forced to bear the entire cost of protecting the Great Lakes region. Therefore, we request full federal funding for Brandon Road Lock and Dam project in the 2022 Water Resources Reform and Development Act. I would also like to draw attention to another project that requires funding in my district, the inclusion of Will County in the Environmental Infrastructure Authorization.
I strongly support their request because it will enable them to expand and support water treatment, water supply, sewer, stormwater, storage treatment, and distribution projects in the district. Will County is one of the fastest growing jurisdictions in Illinois and home to the largest inland port in North America. The county is rapidly diversifying and growing, but the population and economic growth have strained both local infrastructure and resources. In recent years, the area has experienced an increase in flooding incidents along both the Kankakee and DuPage rivers and a dramatic increase in both rainfall and snowfall, straining current water and sewer infrastructure. Funding these projects will improve the quality of life for residents in some of our most disadvantaged communities in the county, enhance the quality of treatment of waters and storm water drainage, and address public safety concerns. Working with my colleagues, I urge your strong consideration of our request for Will County. Thank you again, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Appreciate your testimony. And would like to recognize our next witness, gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Mann, for 5 minutes, sir.
Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Graves, Chairwoman Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. I represent the Big First District of Kansas, which is the exact center of America and the breadbasket of the country. We're the largest beef-producing district in the nation, and we are home to more than 60,000 farms, ranches, and agricultural business. So it's easy to see why advocating for Kansas farmers, ranchers, and agriculture producers is one of the greatest privileges of my job in Congress. And when legislation like the Water Resource Development Act comes up, I will always stand up to make sure that the voices of the Big First are heard. Water is obviously an integral part of agriculture thriving in America. Kansans use it to produce the most affordable and safe food supply in the world. That said, where there's too much water from a flood or not enough water from drought, agriculture producers walk a fine line as they ensure that America remains the most food-secure country in the world. For agricultural businesses to function well, producers need to be able to transport goods and commodities safely, securely, and promptly. They need smooth commercial traffic to flow through our ports and inland waterways. They need flood control and abatement in both the planning stage and emergency relief. And they need improved infrastructure on our waterways like locks and dams. Accordingly, I believe that WRDA is good for both agriculture itself and agriculture businesses in this country. WRDA lets the Army Corps of Engineers work to strengthen the infrastructure in communities facing repeated flooding and reduce the cost of water by adjusting existing water supply contracts. These are great moves for our country that'll keep our people safe and keep money in their pockets. WRDA helps protect not only people's livelihoods, but also their actual lives. I've seen firsthand the damage and horrors that can result from flooding, like last May when it happened in Natoma, Kansas, when flash floods from heavy rains damaged more than half of the homes in town. Shockingly, Natoma didn't qualify for FEMA relief and only 2 people had flood insurance. When we allow WRDA to work, it isn't just good for farmers, ranchers, and agriculture producers, it's good policy for our whole country. WRDA is an effective way to steward taxpayer dollars by responsibly investing in our country up front, rather than spending even more on the back end with disaster relief funding. For America to run smoothly, we need to develop strong water infrastructure and water programs to protect homes and businesses and make sure that weather emergencies don't cripple us. WRDA can help us do just that, which is why I'm outlining my priorities here today. When I see a policy like WRDA that protects people's lives and livelihoods, provides for quick and effective responses in the event of disasters, and makes sure that people aren't overpaying for their utilities, that's a policy that I can support. And with that, Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, sir, for your testimony. The committee will stand in recess to 12:20. We thank you, and we will reconvene in 20 minutes. committee and the committee to order. And thank you for all of the testimony prior to this, and we will now recognize our next member of Congress, the witness, gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Bishop, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today to ask that the subcommittee give the fullest consideration to my Water Resources Development Act requests. I also want to commend the leadership of Chairman DeFazio and Ranking Member Graves for their important work on this issue as well. I submitted 5 requests to the committee which will address long-standing environmental and infrastructure concerns that have an impact on Georgia's 2nd Congressional District and throughout the state. My first priority is to address the perennial problem of aquatic invasive species, particularly hydrilla, that have plagued Lake Seminole for the past 20 years. Many areas of the lake are inaccessible because of hydrilla and aggressive weeds. It negatively affects water quality, the economy, the biosphere, and local businesses. I'm joined by both Congressman Lawson and Congressman Dunn of Florida in asking that the subcommittee identify hydrilla as an additional aquatic invasive species of concern by amending Section 1108 of the Water Resources Development Act of 2018, which directs the Army Corps of Engineers to research their prevention, management, and eradication. Adding hydrilla to the list will emphasize the range of aquatic invasive species that plague the U.S. waterways, as well as it will focus the Corps of Engineers' attention on hydrilla, a particularly pernicious plant. My next 2 requests would greatly improve water quality and water infrastructure in Albany, Georgia. One request would address combined sewer overflow. During hard rains, millions of gallons of sewage mixed with hundreds of millions of gallons of rainwater, and this results in an unhealthy discharge into the Flint River. While the city's made progress separating the overflow, they would benefit from federal support of separate sewage from the rainwater. For this project, I'm requesting an authorization of $105 million in funding for this environmental infrastructure project. The next project for Albany involves the city's floodplain. So I mark the 27th remembrance of the 1994 flood, which was a 500-year flood that literally submerged Albany and separated the city with floodwaters from the Flint River. The Albany State University campus was up to its rooftops, and of course, followed 4 years later by another 500-year flood that had the same results. The people in Albany still remember the tragedies that resulted from that. And so Albany still being flood prone, we're asking that the subcommittee support my request for a study on the feasibility of modifying the landscape to reduce the city's potential. My 4th request focuses on Georgia's maritime shipping infrastructure. As Dean of the Georgia Congressional Delegation, I join my friend and colleague Buddy Carter in requesting a study to determine the feasibility of widening the Savannah Harbor to accommodate a greater throughput of large vessels to ensure that the South's busiest port can keep pace with the ever-growing demand for maritime shipping. The Port of Savannah is the pride of Georgia, particularly in its role as the biggest, busiest, and most economically productive port in the region. The Savannah Harbor Expansion Project has completed many of its milestones since construction commenced in 2015. However, the existing federal channels still cannot adequately support the influx of newer, larger vessels that are calling on the port. Further improvements to the Savannah Harbor will undoubtedly spur economic activity in Georgia and the broader Southeast region. Finally, I'm requesting that the Corps of Engineers study the feasibility of utilizing a forecast-informed reservoir operation system in the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint River Basin. The FIRO system is an approved core policy and a flexible and adaptive water management tool to help water managers make decisions about holding back or releasing water from reservoirs based on modern meteorological, river flow, and other forecasting methods and metrics. With climate change causing increased rainfalls and intermittent drought, forecast-informed reservoir operations in the ACF River Basin will provide the necessary flexibility to meet future climate conditions. I'm grateful for the opportunity to testify on behalf of my word of request. I look forward to working with the committee to provide information and to answer any further questions. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time, 20 seconds.
Thank you for your prompt response. Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Hearing and seeing none, I thank you very much, Mr. Sessions. Next, we have Mr. Earl Blumenaar. Recognize our next witness from Oregon. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Rouser, for providing the opportunity to share my priorities for the upcoming Water Resources Development Bill. Water is an opportunity to reauthorize new projects, continue to modernize the Corps of Engineers, ensuring equity and justice are centered in the Corps' mission. As the committee is aware, based on our work together in 2018, one of my priorities is to ensure the Corps creates adequate tribal housing to address the displacement of Columbia River Treaty tribes by the construction of the Dalles Dam and other dams along the lower Columbia River. The construction of these dams beginning in the 1930s inundated and destroyed villages where the Columbia River tribes lived, fished, and traded for thousands of years. These dams damaged their heritage, livelihoods, and economic base, and they have never been fully compensated for these losses. In 2013, the Corps determined that many tribal families who lived on the banks of the Columbia River prior to construction of the dams did not receive relocation assistance. In 2016, the Corps completed a legal analysis of its unmet obligations to build this housing for the 4 treaty tribes. The Corps found that it had an existing authority to construct 1 village associated with the construction of the Dalles Dam. Following an authorization in the 2018 WARDA, the Corps produced a list of replacement village options associated with the Dalles Dam that were not mutually acceptable to the Columbia River Treaty tribes. Last year, the Corps and the 4 Columbia River Treaty tribes had a government-to-government meeting where they determined that the authorization needs to be updated and clarified. The Corps and the tribes are asking for additional authority to produce a comprehensive village development plan that will help us meet the federal government's unmet obligations to the tribes. I have fought for the construction of this replacement housing with the Corps' existing authority. Now I'm asking that we provide them additional authority in order to fully address the federal government's unmet, acknowledged obligation to the tribe. Another priority of mine is the authorization of the Corps' Portland Metro Levy System Improvement Project. This project will reduce flood risk and increase the resiliency and reliability of a levee system along the Columbia River in the metropolitan area. It was originally designed and constructed by the Corps of Engineers over 80 years ago. This federally authorized infrastructure has allowed the area along the river to become a cornerstone to the regional, statewide, and indeed the national economy. The levee system reduces flood risk for vital infrastructure like the Portland International Airport, 3 interstate highways, an Air National Guard base, a major natural gas pipeline, backup drinking water for nearly 1 million people, and transmission lines for all regional electricity users. In addition to safeguarding thousands of residents, the levees also help keep harmful pollutants out of the Columbia River and protect over 2,000 acres of parks and natural spaces that are home to some endangered and protected species. These improvements to the Portland Metro levee system will increase the resilience, reliability, and operability of the system. It will protect our environment, our communities, especially the most vulnerable. In general, while I applaud the significant progress made by the committee in the 2020 WARDA bill, we must continue to ensure that the Corps has the tools and capacity needed to advance community-supported solutions to water resources challenges for the nation's most vulnerable communities. I've submitted requests to this end, asking that we in Congress continue to work with the Corps to ensure the agency is taking full advantage of existing programs, authorities, and operations to leverage natural systems and prioritize resilience in the face of increasingly frequent and severe climate disasters. These issues are critical for my constituents. They're critical for our region and indeed for the nation. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to share my perceptions and requests with the subcommittee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Blumenauer, for your testimony. And we now would like to recognize our next witness, Gentlewoman for Virginia, Ms. Luria, for 5 minutes.
Well,
Thank you, Chairwoman Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser and my colleagues on the subcommittee for this opportunity. I'd like to bring some attention to a few critical issues that impact water infrastructure in my district. Virginia's 2nd District is defined by its wetlands, Chesapeake Bay tributaries, and the Norfolk Harbor. My district and the surrounding region requires significant water infrastructure and resiliency investments. To understand my district, one must understand that the Port of Virginia is the gateway to transporting goods to so many communities. Federal facilities and installations make up a significant portion of my district, and the Eastern Shore is also facing severe resiliency threats, particularly from erosion. These 3 defining factors have impacted my request for the Water Resources Development Act of fiscal year 2022. My top request for WRDA 2022 is that the Congress include language to clarify that federal facilities are in fact included in the Coastal Resiliency Feasibility Study for coastal Virginia. Hampton Roads region is home to 18 military installations, including Naval Station Norfolk, the world's largest naval base, and Langley Air Force Base, the world's oldest and continuously operating Air Force base. Currently, there are limitations under existing authorities that restrict the ability to incorporate these installations and facilities into the civil works planning and construction process. Excluding a large portion of the region from these studies would result in an illogical data gap for the Army Corps. Reducing or removing those challenges and limitations potentially generates federal cost savings and increased regional climate resilience through military and civil works partnerships on coastal storm risk management. Lacking the ability to incorporate military installations and other federal facilities into the civil works project implementation process will force the Corps to perform work solely on a cost reimbursable basis in accordance with one of the several available reimbursement authorities. It requires each federal facility to individually carry out their own study, which is an enormous financial and logistical burden. For a coastal storm risk management study of significant size like coastal Virginia, the coordination process under these authorities would be logistically impractical. Secondly, I'd like to talk about Norfolk Harbor Anchorage Foxtrot. The Port of Virginia is one of the nation's and Commonwealth's most significant economic engines. On an annual basis, the port is responsible for more than 400,000 jobs and $92 billion in spending across the Commonwealth and generates more than 7.5% of Virginia's gross state product. I'm grateful that the Norfolk Harbor is receiving robust funding from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and from standard appropriations. However, further action is needed. Anchorage Foxtrot at the Norfolk Harbor is used primarily as an emergency swing anchorage to prepare for inclement weather conditions in the harbor or Chesapeake Bay. For vessels effectively use the anchorage, it's imperative that the anchorage approach the depths matched to the current federal channel. Norfolk Harbor's Anchorage Foxtrot is currently designed as a 3,000-foot diameter circle for free-swinging bow anchorage. The proposed modification includes the widening of Anchorage Foxtrot beyond its current authorized diameter of 3,620 feet to 3,840 feet and deepening the anchorage to 55 feet to be consistent with the 1986 authorization and the project depth of the federal channel. This modification will provide a deeper and wider anchorage and will permit use by larger vessels calling at the port. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the Eastern Shore of Virginia and the Cedar Island feasibility study. The Eastern Shore of Virginia has been fervently fighting erosion and sea level rise as well as land subsidence, specifically a barrier island called Cedar Island. Cedar Island is a major Virginia seaside barrier island, and barrier islands enhance back barrier marsh resilience to sea level rise. Both the barrier island and the marsh provide storm and flood protection of the mainland infrastructure from the Atlantic Ocean. Cedar Island has been undergoing significant coastal erosion for decades with substantial damage from Superstorm Sandy. The continuing erosion of Cedar Island will eventually open the seaside marsh and mainland to full ocean impact. We must take a closer look at Cedar Island and how to preserve the marsh. That is why I requested a specific Army Corps feasibility study for this area. Again, I would like to thank Chair Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser and my colleagues on this committee for giving me the chance to speak today about these important priorities throughout coastal Virginia. By making much-needed investments in our water infrastructure, we can set coastal Virginia communities up for economic success and ensure their resiliency in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Luria. I'd like to tell it's going to be Mr. Sessions, Ms. Stanberry, Mr. Trone, and Mr. Correa. Mr. Sessions, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much. What an honor it is to be before both you and the ranking member from North Carolina, Mr. Rouser. Madam Chairman, I'm seeking your assistance to authorize this project, which I will speak of, whose appropriations level we're seeking. The authorization for that would be for $30 million to complete the Lake Waco Embankment Stabilization Project. Madam Chairman, Texas primarily lives off surface water. We have lakes all over the state of Texas, which are designed to help cities not only have enough water for their needs, but also a chain system whereby water moves down rivers to other places. This is all taken care of through the wise management of the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers are very important to the state of Texas as they are to other states, that they provide not only professional and engineering support, but really wise management. Something beyond their control occurred in 2015, where Texas and all of Texas received the highest rainfall amount that they have ever received. Waco, Texas in particular, received 9.27 inches of rainfall in May alone. This was over several days, not over the month, but that was the monthly total. Between April and June, a total of 20 inches fell over that period of time, and the all-time record was just 4 months later in October, 15.19 inches. Madam Chairman, this placed the Corps of Engineers in a very difficult circumstance whereby they were trying to manage the water flow up and down these rivers that were swollen, that caused communities great harm by flooding and other things. And I think the Corps of Engineers was in trouble, and they tried to deal with this. But what happened is that Lake Waco is a reservoir that's set aside, not one of those primary places that would release water, and they could not release water even though it was all over the state of Texas because of downstream flooding. Because of this, this caused extensive damage to a roadway known as Lakeshore Drive that comes near the lake. The excessive level of water caused erosion through wave action over the several weeks. This wave action put in jeopardy, and has now over time through erosion, this roadway that Waco is responsible for in jeopardy. In the bill S-1811 that was passed in the 116th Congress through the Water Resources Development Act, Section 147, as part of this work, we went and made sure that there was legislation which would allow the Corps of Engineers through the Secretary to be able to make a determination that even though they were not maybe directly in charge of this, that they had a part of that damage. They actually controlled the water. The city of Waco did not control the water that would be taken out of the reservoir, and as a result of excessive time that it was there, it has caused this damage. It is very important to Waco, Texas, that they take care of those parts that they believe are responsible for. This is damage that was caused solely as a result of that rising water at the lake, and I believe that that fits well within the Corps of Engineers. I respectfully submit myself to you today and to the gentleman, Mr. Rouser, to ask for you to please include this in the authorization that would be necessary that would give relief to this. And the reason why is that if it continues to go on, if there's continued erosion, that it could cause what is estimated to be about $100 million worth of damage. Extensive evaluation by an engineering company has been done. I believe the Corps of Engineers is aware of this, and I would ask that this project please be included within your authorization mark that you make. Madam Chairman, Mr. Rouser, I want to thank you for your time. As always, if you have any questions, please seek me. I'll be very pleased to discuss it with you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sessions. You submitted a letter. We'll include it in the record as requested.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony, sir. I look forward to looking at the project.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Next, I would like to recognize the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Stanberry, online.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to our ranking member Rouser, and thank you to everyone who serves on this important committee for the work that you do to support our water resources management across the country. As we consider the 2022 Water Resources Development Act, many of you know our West and our communities across the Southwest are gripped by the worst drought that we've seen in 1,200 years. And as we all know, this is very much the signature of climate change. New Mexicans are deeply concerned about ensuring that our water infrastructure is up to the challenge of responding to this drought and the increasing hydrologic change that we're seeing across our communities. To this end, we are humbly requesting the inclusion of several community-driven and science-based proposals in the 2022 WRDA Act, which would greatly improve water infrastructure and management across our state and across our district. First, we humbly request that the committee consider authorizing an additional $50 million for the Section 593 program and include water reuse projects as an environmental infrastructure project eligible for assistance under Section 593C. Increasing the Section 593 authorization would help to fund drinking water, wastewater, water security, and stormwater projects throughout New Mexico's 1st Congressional District and across our state. We also humbly request that the committee include language directing the Army Corps and other federal water management authorities to work together with the National Academy of Sciences and other agencies to study system operations and management on the Rio Grande Basin and recommend management models, systems, and operational challenges. This study will help water managers throughout the Rio Grande improve management, flexibility, and water security, which is crucial to our long-term water security in our state, especially as we are facing climate change. I am also currently drafting legislation that would provide the flexible authorities to increase operational flexibility on the Rio Grande. Our office is also working to draft legislation to unleash the power of big data and water data to improve real-time water management across the country. By improving federal water data availability, interoperability, and tools, along with partnerships with state, tribal, local, and other entities, we have the capacity to fundamentally transform how we manage our water. I request that this committee consider prioritizing requests and projects that improve water data and tools and potentially include authorizing language to support this effort. Also included in our request is a request for the town of Estancia, New Mexico, which is a rural underserved community facing imminent threats of water shortages. We respectfully ask that the committee authorize $100,000 for the Corps to update a hydrologic analysis for the town of Estancia so that we can address the much needed infrastructure needs of this community. Additionally, the Middle Rio Grande Flood Protection Project, which was originally authorized with a 25% non-federal cost share, we respect that the cost share be reduced so that the project can move forward without further delays for our community. The Omnibus Public Lands Act of 2009 authorized $4 million to the Bureau of Reclamation to study irrigation infrastructure for 18 federally recognized pueblos in New Mexico who rely on water from the Rio Grande for cultural, agricultural, municipal, and ceremonial purposes. The study identified $280 million in irrigation improvements needed on Pueblo lands. While this may not fall within the jurisdiction of the Army Corps, I urge that the committee consider authorizing an additional $200 million to the Bureau of Reclamation should projects be included for other agencies for the Pueblo Irrigation Infrastructure Improvement Project. We also ask that the committee consider including funding for our Acequia Resilience and Tribal Acequia program. Finally, I request that the committee authorize an additional $5 million for the Tribal Partnership Program. This program is the only Corps authority that specifically directs partnerships with tribes and supports the administration's commitment to addressing the water needs of our tribal and rural communities, particularly in underserved communities. I thank the Madam Chairwoman and Ranking Member for the time and opportunity today and look forward to working with you to see these proposals come to fruition. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Ms. Plaskett. Is there any questions? Hearing none and seeing none, I thank you again. And we will have testimony, Mr. Trone, Mr. Correa, and Mrs. Plaskett. Mr. Trone, you're on for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser, for the opportunity to submit testimony to the Committee on Transportation, Infrastructure, Subcommittee on Water Resources and the Environment. As you draft the Water Resources Development Act of 2022, I'd like to highlight 2 priorities that are essential in my district, Maryland's 6th district, and the wider community. As our nation works to repair our infrastructure, it's critical we discuss the impact these systems have on the health of our communities and the health of our environment. Within my district, the town of Boonesboro and the city of Brunswick need to support address infrastructure needs. Local officials have worked hard to find solutions to the growing issues in order to support Marylanders and protect our environment. My first request to the committee is for the environmental infrastructure needs of the town of Boonesboro, including replacing the Boonesboro Reservoir. The Boonesboro Reservoir is an aging 1.3 million gallon drinking water reservoir built way back in 1954. The reservoir serves both Boonesboro and Keedysville, which Boonesboro shares a drinking water system with. Unfortunately, the reservoir is suffering from leaks which impair its function and cost the town an estimated 15,000 to 25,000 gallons of treated water per day. Due to the reservoir's age and condition, it's unable to be repaired. If the sidewalls and levees were to fail, the resulting flooding and disruption in water service would be devastating to both public health and environmental perspective. I'm requesting $5 million in environmental infrastructure to address the needs of the town and replace the broken reservoir, preventing future damage. My second request to the committee would support the environmental infrastructure needs of the city of Brunswick, including upgrading the Brunswick wastewater treatment plant. The Brunswick wastewater treatment plant was constructed in the 1980s and designed to treat 0.6 million gallons a day of municipal wastewater. In 2007, the plant upgraded the treatment capacity to 1.4 million gallons a day. Today, the plant has equipment that is near failure, and the town is gravely at risk of violating the sewage sludge utilization permit due to inadequate sludge dewatering. As it stands, the plant also lacks treatment capacity for any future expansion. This is an environmental hazard that could affect the Potomac River along which the plant sits. I'm requesting $15 million in environmental infrastructure funding to address the needs of the city, including resolving the immediate needs of the plant and increasing treatment capacity. Chairwoman Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser, and members of the subcommittee, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to submit this testimony. I look forward to working with you to ensure the Water Resource Development Act of 2022 reflects our needs as a nation. Thanks again very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. It's very nice of you to cut short. Makes our job easier here. Thank you. Have a good day. The next, I would like to recognize our next witness, gentleman from California, Mr. Correa, who's done a good job in representing me.
Thank you, Madam Chair Napolitano and Ranking Member Rouser, for your indulgence, for hosting Members' Day for members to share their request for Water Resources Development Act of 2022. Before I start with my statement, I want to go through and give you a little bit of history of Orange County, California. Orange County has traditionally been an agricultural county. Back in the 1930s, we had major flooding in this area that's subject to this request. A lot of damage, when it was an agricultural county. Orange County's population has gone from about 100,000 to about 3.4 million people today. Home to Disneyland, Anaheim Angels, Anaheim Ducks. Very densely populated area, Orange County, California. The Santa Ana River Main Street project, the subject of this request, is a almost $3 billion cooperative flood control project between the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the counties of Orange and Riverside and San Bernardino. The project was authorized by Congress in the Water Resources Act of 1986, and construction began in 1989. Main features: construction of Seven Oaks Dam, improvements to the Prado Dam reservoir, and improvements to the lower river in Orange County. The last component, remaining component in Orange County flood risk management for the Santiago Creek area includes the building, storage, and essentially working on the existing gravel pits, unlet structures, and downstream channelizations. Now, let me tell you that the Santa Ana River was once characterized as the worst flood threat west of the Mississippi. Once completed, this project will prevent an estimated $40 billion in damages, protect over 100,000 acres in Orange County, and benefit over 4 million residents in Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. For this reason, my request would raise the authorized federal help for the Santa Ana River Main Street project by an additional $170 million, so that we can complete this project as designed, improved, all of the components, period. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we're a very densely populated county. Back in the day, when Orange County was essentially an agricultural area, our founding fathers never thought about recreational areas. They never thought about putting land aside to build parks because we were an ag area, open, wide spaces. That's no longer the case. Today, Orange County, my area in Orange County, is probably the second most densely populated area in the state of California, and I'm sure one of the top most densely populated areas in the United States. To that end, I'm also requesting, my second request, $10 million to conduct a study, design, and construction on modifications to the project to direct the Army Corps of Engineers to add recreational areas along the Santiago Creek and the confluence of the Santiago Creek and Santa Ana rivers. Madam Chair and Ranking Member, what we want to do is secure Orange County's economy, make sure we don't have one of those big floods again like we had in the 1930s. We're almost there. Let's finish the job. And at the same time, for another $10 million, make sure that that Santa Ana River, which is now lined with cement, becomes a river of life, so it's a win-win situation. Our constituents can recreate in an area that keeps them safe from that 200-year flood. Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Correa, and I agree with you on that. We will have, thank you for your testimony, sir, and thank you again for everything you've done. Now, next we have Ms. Lee, followed by Mr. Valadao. Ms. Lee, gentlewoman from Nevada, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Rouser, for having this Members' Day hearing on this critically important bill that addresses the water supply and environmental infrastructure needs of this nation and our local communities. As many of you know, Southern Nevada, where I represent, and the entire West is facing an unprecedented drought. In my district, Lake Mead, which supplies water for 25 million people across Nevada, Arizona, and California, is at the lowest level it has been since the Hoover Dam was constructed in the 1930s. Now more than ever, it's critical that we build the infrastructure we need to make our communities resilient to drought and to better manage our water resources. And that's precisely why I'm advocating for critical investments in Section 595, the Army Corps program in rural Nevada and across the western U.S. To date, funding for this water management program has been almost completely expended since its last authorization. Section 595 allows the Army Corps to provide design and construction assistance for water-related environmental infrastructure projects. These projects include things like wastewater treatment plants, water supply facilities, environmental restoration, and surface water protection. In my district, Section 595 has funded a range of projects to protect water resources and ensure our community has access to clean drinking water. In Searchlight, Nevada, the Army Corps was critical in the design and construction of the Searchlight water and wastewater system improvements. In Boulder City, they renovated 3 city wastewater pump stations and several miles of force main to protect against accidental discharge of wastewater into the Lake Mead National Recreation Area and Lake Mead. And just outside of Las Vegas, the Army Corps in Las Vegas Valley Water District have worked closely to complete an urgent upgrade to meet fire protection and emergency requirements after the system suffered water leaks, excessive corrosion, and main breaks. The declining groundwater levels and well deterioration presented a significant water supply risk for the greater Las Vegas Valley community. Section 595 was critical to updating our facilities and protecting against ongoing drought conditions so that the existing water system has a reliable means to safely provide for the community's water needs. I cannot stress how important Section 595 program is for Southern Nevada and the American West, as the region faces the worst drought we have faced in 12 centuries. Yes, I said that, 12 centuries. But thank you again, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Rouser, and again, I urge you to support this important program.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Lee, and that's be taken into consideration. I would like to recognize our next member, the gentlewoman for U.S. Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett. You're on, Ms. Plaskett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here with you, Chairwoman Napolitano, as well as Ranking Member Rouser, members of the subcommittee, and particularly, of course, the staff who do so much of the great work. I want to thank you for the opportunity to advocate on behalf of my district, the U.S. Virgin Islands, as well as the non-contiguous portions of this country, as the committee develops the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. I have a lot of critical priorities that I'd like to discuss with you, but I think I'd rather use my time to talk specifically about some policy issues and policy changes, which I believe will be really helpful to the U.S. Virgin Islands as well as the non-contiguous U.S. in moving forward with a variety of projects for flood control, storm damage reduction, and ecosystem restoration. The Virgin Islands is currently having difficulty with moving ahead on projects that have been authorized and funded due to insufficient funds to pay local cost share requirements. Therefore, I've requested language to allow non-federal sponsors to use state and local fiscal recovery funds to pay the local cost share on all phases of water resources development projects. This is consistent with the Department of Treasury's guidance on the use of these funds under the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. However, the Corps of Engineers is presently requiring non-federal sponsors to obtain a signed letter from the U.S. Treasury Secretary to explicitly authorize such use of funds to pay the local cost share on each water resources development project. This is an unnecessary bureaucratic hurdle. It's impractical, unreasonable, and unrealistic for each project, and the inconsistency with standing guidance issued for the use of funding provided for the state and local fiscal recovery funds under the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Allowing the use of the ARPA funding to meet local cost share requirements will greatly benefit the Virgin Islands because sufficient local funds are not available to pay for medium-sized flood control projects that were authorized in the Water Resources Development Act of 2020 and funded to build with resources allocated under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Disaster Relief Act of 2021. I've also asked that cost share waiver authority that currently exists for U.S. territories and Indian tribes under Section 1156 of the Water Resources Development Act of 1986 be extended to apply to the pre-construction design and engineering phase of a water resource development project, in addition to studies. This would tremendously help to both the territories and Indian tribes. In my district, due to insufficient funds to pay local cost share and the inability to use the ARPA funding to pay such local cost share, the pre-construction design and engineering phase of the largest flood risk management project on St. Thomas that is currently authorized and funded cannot move forward. These are examples, I believe, of policy issues which I think could work to support the increase in completing these projects and making sure that they're done. And lastly, I've requested with other members from the non-contiguous U.S. that the committee include language to authorize the Secretary in conducting a study of flood risk management or hurricane and storm damage risk reduction to recommend a project in the non-contiguous U.S. without needing a demonstration that the project can be justified by national economic development benefits. The non-contiguous areas of the U.S. are set apart geographically from the rest of the country and have special needs related to flood risk management or hurricane and storm damage risk reduction. I have a written testimony which has much more specificity with regard to priorities and projects, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today about these issues, and thank you for your time. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Plaskett. We understand the issues that the territories have, and we're trying to work with them to see what we can do to help out. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to recognize our next member, gentleman from California, Mr. Valadao. You're on for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Napolitano, Ranking Member Rouser, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for this opportunity to advocate for my requests for the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. I'm glad to see the committee is planning to stay on the 2-year track with WRDA legislation. Improving projects, processes, and access to water is crucial, especially in districts like mine. Even though many of the federal assets in my district and across California are managed by the Bureau of Reclamation, there are still opportunities in WRDA bills to help the Central Valley. I'd like to start by discussing my request to include my legislation, the Renew Win Act, in the base bill. This legislation was actually first enacted in the WRDA bill of 2016, which was ultimately signed into law as the Win Act. According to a study from the UC Merced, the drought directly cost the agriculture economy in California $1.1 billion, 8,750 jobs last year. The Central Valley desperately needs water, and this no-cost clean extension of the operations and storage provision in the WIN Act is an important step to ensure a reliable water supply for our communities. Specifically, the bill extends through 2031 the authority of the Bureau of Reclamation to provide support for federal or state-led water storage projects in certain western states. It also extends provisions specific to California, including drought relief and the operations of the Central Valley Project, which is a hydropower and water management project in California that is operated by the Bureau of Reclamation. Further, the bill extends through 2036 consultation requirements concerning biological assessments and the coordinated operations of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project in California. My next request is about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the Big Dry Creek Reservoir and the Fancher Creek Reservoir in Fresno County. The project was originally designed to help the San Joaquin Valley region with flood control. The language submitted to you would provide the Army Corps with authority for temporary storage of water, which is much needed in our region. Groundwater basins in the San Joaquin Valley have long suffered from critical overdraft. Prolonged drought, like what we are currently facing, has enhanced the need for additional water storage in the region. Reoperation of the Red Bank and Fancher Creeks project would greatly help the area by temporarily storing and redistributing the water for recharge to better balance groundwater levels for our communities and economy. This project will provide the necessary evaluation and improvements to reoperate reservoirs within the Red Bank and the Fancher Creeks project, primarily the Dry Creek Reservoir. Reoperation will allow for the holding of stormwater into spring and summer for the later release in the region's extensive system of groundwater recharge basins. The ability to capture, store, and effectively use these flows is critical to the region's efforts to balance water use and long-term water sustainability. Repetitive and often severe drought experienced by the Fresno-Clovis regions calls for this water supply resiliency afforded by maximizing the storage of surface water. The project will serve as a conservation pool for short-term storage of available surface waters up to 15,000 acre-feet and will be used for downstream beneficial uses, primarily direct and indirect recharge within the critically overdrafted groundwater basin. This project will help meet the water needs of our communities, which are mainly disadvantaged. Finally, I would like to highlight my final request that would amend the Army Corps project purpose to include water supply. Given the increasing frequency of periods of excess water and excess drought as a result of extreme weather conditions, this additional authority would help to utilize and maximize storage capacity to serve the beneficial uses in California. This is a cost-effective way to prepare for drought emergencies and increase climate resiliencies. The provision provides the Secretary with more flexibility in how they are able to adapt to future climate scenarios. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity to highlight the importance of my WRDA requests. I hope you will seriously consider the inclusion of these requests in the base bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Valadao, for your testimony, and it will be considered. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next witness, the next member, and probably the last, is the gentleman from Hawaii, Mr. Case. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, members of the committee. Aloha and mahalo for the opportunity to support this committee's continued efforts on behalf of critical water resources activities and programs that are important to both our nation and to my home state of Hawaii. Hawaii, of course, is an island state with the ocean on all sides, so the impacts of our ocean on our land directly affect our everyday lives. This is especially important where we go to enjoy our oceans and marine environment, and where we host millions of visitors per year seeking the same experience, making travel and tourism by far our largest single economy. So the impacts of climate change on coastal erosion and flooding, especially along our world-class beaches, are severe both as to our economy and our way of life. The state of Hawaii needs the technical assistance only the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers can provide to save our precious beaches and oceans, especially iconic Waikiki Beach and the surrounding Mamala Bay. This is my top WRDA request to this committee for assistance. Mamala Bay and Waikiki Beach and Honolulu have played a central role in Hawaii's recreational, cultural, and economic story for centuries. Waikiki Beach and its offshore waters form the hub of our visitor industry, our largest overall economic driver with direct contributions of around 25% of our total GDP. Waikiki Beach is one of the most visited and enjoyed beaches on Earth with over 10 million visitors per year. These visitors are both local residents, for whom Waikiki Beach is the most central ocean recreation area in urban Honolulu, and are tourists. The majority of tourists who visit Hawaii stay at some point in Waikiki hotels and resorts right on Waikiki Beach or right next to it so they can visit the beach. A 2016 report by the University of Hawaii concluded that some 58% of tourists to Waikiki would not have visited if there was no beach and easy ocean access at Waikiki. However, the increasing impacts of climate change and sea level rise, which is especially problematic for island states and territories such as Hawaii, are taking an alarming toll on Waikiki Beach. Especially over the past decade, there have been an alarming increase in shoreline erosion with associated impacts on the immediate ocean habitat, ecosystems, and recreational opportunities. These have been exacerbated by completely inadequate shoreline stabilization efforts for decades, and in some places over a century old. The threat of further accelerating erosion up to the total loss of the beach is very real. The consequences would be widespread. In the visitor industry alone, the University of Hawaii 2016 study concluded that complete erosion of Waikiki Beach would result in a loss of some $2.2 billion annually in spending and revenue for Hawaii's economy. There have been some small and discrete stabilization projects initiated and implemented along specific portions of the Waikiki coastline, but no comprehensive integrated project that would address the threat in its entirety. A new comprehensive feasibility study is required to develop a project or series of projects that address the long-term sustainability and utility of Waikiki Beach and its adjacent ocean environment and critical public infrastructure. Such a study will help ensure the associated recreational and economic benefits are preserved and enhanced. Your committee has within its power the ability to make a legislative correction to assure this study can move forward. Section 209 of Public Law 87-874 currently authorizes the Corps of Engineers to conduct surveys of flood and tidal events only of Hawaii's rivers and harbors, but it does not cover related shorelines or nearby buildings and infrastructure. There is really no justification for this distinction, especially in the specific case of Waikiki Beach, where the basic challenge extends from the land through the beach to the marine environment. Your support is needed to make sure we take into consideration the outsized issues like this that remote and coastal locations face as our country debates how to approach impacts to infrastructure due to climate change. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to the Corps of Engineers for its continued commitment to improving and adjusting to these unique situations in Hawaii and urge further consideration of these topics that are so vital to my home island state. Mahalo again for your time, and I appreciate your consideration of these concerns from Hawaii as you reauthorize the Water Resources Development Act.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Case, and I understand what climate change is doing to all of the United States. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the members for their testimony. It was very enlightening and very helpful to the subcommittee. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided any answers. There were no questions, so I guess that doesn't apply. To any questions that may be submitted to them in writing, I ask unanimous consent that the record remain open 50 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members of Congress to be included in the record of today's hearing. And without objection, so ordered. I would like to thank our witnesses again for their testimony. Do you have any comments?
It was a great subcommittee hearing, Madam Chair, and I look forward to lunch.
Thank you for hanging with us. I would like to thank our witnesses again for their testimony, and if no members have no other anything to add, the committee stands adjourned.